The woman in the faded raincoat counted her coins twice before placing them on the marble counter.
Are you sure you can afford anything in here?
To the two cashiers behind the counter, she looked like a problem that had walked in wearing cheap clothes.
She looks like she came in from the alley.
They made her wait, served customers who came after her, and gave her the oldest croissant in the display case. Eleanor took the paper bag without complaint and sat at the small table near the trash station.
Some people don't understand where they belong.
As she bit into the dry croissant, the company slogan did not feel like a promise anymore.
So this is what warmth became.
Then she heard the cashiers talking.
Careless because they believed no one important was listening. People like that ruin the whole atmosphere.
They spoke of certain customers as if they were stains on the atmosphere.
We should put her on the list before she comes back.
They had created a quiet system for making certain customers feel unwelcome enough to stop returning.
The wrong people need a little push out the door.
Older man entered wearing a navy cap and holding a small wallet in both hands.
Not him again.
He counted coins, carefully apologizing with his posture before anyone even asked him to.
This is a bakery, not a coin machine.
And that was the moment the woman in the raincoat stopped chewing, because the people behind the counter had no idea who she really was. The woman in the faded raincoat counted her coins twice before placing them on the marble counter. Her sleeves were damp from the morning rain, her shoes were scuffed at the toes, and the paper grocery bag hanging from her wrist had a small tear near the bottom. To anyone kind, she might have looked tired. To anyone careful, she might have looked like someone who had been carrying more than groceries. But to the two cashiers behind the counter, she looked like a problem that had walked in wearing cheap clothes. They did not know her name. They did not know that the polished bakery around them, from the golden logo on the glass door to the elegant slogan painted across the wall, existed because of her. They did not know that the woman quietly asking for one plain croissant was Eleanor Vale, founder and chief executive of Hearth and Hollow Bakery, a 58-store chain built on the promise that no one should ever be made to feel too poor, too tired, or too ordinary to deserve warmth. They only saw what they wanted to see. A woman who would not tip well. A woman who would not photograph her coffee for social media. A woman who did not belong in the bright little world they believed the flagship store was supposed to represent. So they made her wait. They served 3 customers who came after her. They reminded her of the price before she had even finished ordering. And when she finally placed her coins on the counter, they gave her the oldest croissant in the display case, the one that should have been pulled from sale before sunrise. Eleanor took the paper bag without complaint and sat at the small table near the trash station. It was the table people chose only when every other seat was full, the one beneath the cold draft from the side door. Across the room, painted in cream-colored letters, above a row of polished wooden booths, were the words that had made Hearth and Hollow famous. Warmth belongs to everyone. Those words appeared on every cup, every napkin, every training video, every investor presentation. Customers took photographs beneath them. Managers repeated them at orientation. The marketing team had built entire campaigns around them. But that morning, as Eleanor bit into a dry, stale croissant in the corner of her own flagship bakery, the words did not feel like a promise. They felt like a witness. Then she heard the cashiers talking. At first, it was the usual careless cruelty people use when they think no one important is listening. They laughed about the old man who paid in coins. They mocked delivery riders who asked for water. They complained about nurses coming in after night shifts with tired faces and cheap shoes. They spoke of certain customers as if they were stains on the atmosphere, people who made the bakery look less refined, simply by sitting down. Then one of them mentioned a list. Not a company list, not an official policy. Something they had created themselves, a quiet system for making certain customers feel so unwelcome that they would stop returning. They called it the Velvet List because in their minds, Hearth and Hollow was supposed to feel soft, beautiful, and expensive, and some people, they believed, were not fit to touch velvet. Eleanor did not move. She kept her head lowered beneath the brim of her gray cap and held the croissant like any tired customer trying to disappear into the corner. But every sense in her body had sharpened. Years in boardrooms had taught her how to sit still while people revealed more than they meant to. She had heard lies dressed as strategy, cruelty dressed as standards, and theft dressed as efficiency. But what she heard next made her freeze. One of the cashiers said the night baker needed to be gone before Monday, because if Maya Reyes kept talking, the whole Sunrise honey bun story could fall apart. Maya Reyes. The name had appeared once in a report on Eleanor's desk, buried beneath phrases that had made the issue sound small. A difficult employee, a misunderstanding about credit, a resolved workplace conflict. At the time, Eleanor had almost trusted the summary. Almost. But now, sitting in disguise at a table no one respected, she understood something cold and simple. The reports reaching her office had not been telling the truth. They had been covering it. To understand why that moment mattered, you have to understand what Hearth and Hollow was before it became a brand. Before the 58 stores, before the soft lighting and seasonal pastries, before investors called it a premium community bakery concept. It began with a little girl and her mother standing outside a bakery window on a winter morning, looking at warm bread they could barely afford. Eleanor had been 8 years old then. Her mother had saved coins for 2 days to buy one sweet roll for her birthday. They were poor, but her mother wanted her to have 1 hour that felt special. They entered the bakery with wet shoes and shy smiles. The man behind the counter served them because their money was real enough to take, but he made it clear that they could not sit near the window. He placed them at the little table near the restroom, beside the mop bucket and the draft from the back door. Eleanor remembered the shame more than the taste of the pastry. She remembered her mother pretending not to care. She remembered other customers looking away. Most of all, she remembered realizing that a room could be warm for some people and cold for others, depending on who was allowed to feel welcome. Years later, when she opened the first Hearth and Hollow, she painted her promise on the wall before she even ordered the menu board. Warmth belongs to everyone. It was not branding then. It was not a slogan. It was a vow made to the child she had been, and to the mother who had swallowed humiliation so her daughter could have one birthday pastry. The first store was small and imperfect. The chairs did not match. The counter had scratches. The original tip jar was an old blue ceramic jar painted with a little lighthouse. Eleanor baked before sunrise, served coffee at noon, washed dishes after closing, and learned the names of customers most businesses would have overlooked. A retired bus driver, a mail carrier, a young nurse, a man who sometimes slept in his car, but still insisted on paying for black coffee. Eleanor learned early that a bakery could feed more than hunger. It could tell a person they were still welcome in the world. Then the little store became 3 stores, then 11, then 30, then 58. The logo became cleaner. The chairs matched. The menu became seasonal. The old wooden counter was replaced by stone. The first location was renovated into the company's flagship store, polished until it looked less like a neighborhood bakery and more like a photograph of one. From headquarters, everything looked beautiful. Revenue was up. Customer traffic was strong. The flagship store had become the crown jewel of the company. Social media showed golden pastries, smiling employees, and sunlight falling perfectly over cups of coffee. The regional manager, Victor Harlan, reported that the store was thriving. Victor was calm, polished, and precise, the kind of man who could make any problem sound like a minor adjustment already handled. So when Eleanor first saw the negative reviews and anonymous employee complaints, Victor dismissed them gently. He said growth always made some people uncomfortable. He said high standards could feel unfair to employees who resisted accountability. He said one night, Baker, Maya Reyes, had been especially emotional about ordinary product development decisions. He said the situation had been resolved through coaching. The phrase should have comforted Eleanor. Instead, it stayed with her. A few days later, an envelope arrived without a return address. Inside was a torn strip of apron cloth dusted with flour, a photocopy of a strange tip distribution sheet, and a scrap of parchment paper with one sentence written in blue ink. "Ask who really bakes the sunrise buns." At the bottom was a tiny drawing of a lighthouse. Eleanor stared at that drawing longer than she expected to. It reminded her of the old blue tip jar from the first store, the one that had disappeared during renovation. Something about the envelope felt less like a complaint and more like a final attempt from someone who no longer trusted the official channels. So Eleanor stopped asking for reports. She went to see the truth herself. She bought the faded raincoat from a thrift store 2 neighborhoods away. She wore old shoes, a gray cap, and a delivery tote. She made herself look like someone the world was used to overlooking. Then, just after sunrise, she walked through the glass doors of her own flagship bakery as a stranger. The first thing she noticed was not open cruelty. It was performance. That made it worse. When a well-dressed couple entered ahead of her, Brielle Voss greeted them with a brightness so polished it seemed to sparkle. Brielle was the lead cashier, the face of the morning counter, beautiful in a sharp, curated way, with perfect hair and a smile that turned on instantly for the right kind of customer. Beside her, Kendra Pike laughed softly, offered samples, and made sure the couple knew about the limited edition glaze that had been trending online. Their warmth appeared instantly, like lights switched on for an audience. Then Eleanor stepped forward, and the lights went out. Brielle's eyes moved over the raincoat, the worn tote, the coins in Eleanor's hand. Something in her face hardened just enough for a person who had once been poor to recognize. Kendra became suddenly busy, wiping an already clean counter. The silence lasted just long enough to make Eleanor feel that asking for service was an inconvenience. That was how cruelty survived in places like this. Not always through shouting, not always through insults that could be quoted in a complaint. Sometimes it survived in pauses, glances, slow service, the wrong pastry, the cold seat near the trash, the tiny message that said a person could buy something but still not belong. Eleanor stayed after receiving her croissant. She listened, she watched, and the longer she stayed, the uglier the pattern became. An older man entered wearing a navy cap and holding a small wallet in both hands. His name was Samuel Brooks, though Eleanor did not know it yet. He ordered 1 sunrise honey bun and a small coffee. He counted coins carefully, apologizing with his posture even before anyone asked him to. Brielle's smile thinned. Kendra muttered that some people treated the register like a coin machine. The words were quiet enough to deny, but clear enough to wound. Samuel pretended not to hear. He looked once toward the table by the window, where morning light rested across the wood, then chose a seat closer to the back. Later, Eleanor would learn that Samuel had come to that same store every Friday morning with his wife, June, for 13 years. They had shared one honey bun and 2 coffees at the window table through retirement, illness, and the quiet narrowing of life. After June died, Samuel kept coming alone, not because the bun was just a pastry, but because grief sometimes survives by repeating small acts of love. Brielle and Kendra did not know that, or worse, they did not care. To them, Samuel was simply another low-value customer, another name for the velvet list. Eleanor watched 2 nurses in wrinkled scrubs get told the restroom was for paying customers, even though they had already ordered. She watched a delivery rider wait, while customers who came after him were served first. She watched a construction worker quietly move away from the front seating area after Kendra made a comment about muddy boots, even though the floor was clean. None of these moments was dramatic enough to make the evening news, but together they formed a culture, a polished room where kindness flowed upward and contempt flowed down. Then the cashier spoke of Maya. Maya Reyes, they said, had become a problem. She kept asking about missing tips. She kept claiming ownership over recipes created on company time. She had become protective of a notebook. Victor had promised to handle her before Monday's national launch. Once Maya was gone, no one would be able to prove where the Sunrise honey buns had really come from. Eleanor left without revealing herself. She did not confront Brielle. She did not comfort Samuel in the moment. She did not call Victor from the sidewalk. Powerful people who are warned too early start cleaning before the truth can be preserved. Instead, Eleanor walked 3 blocks in the rain, sat on a bench outside a closed florist, and called Miriam Chen, the company's head of internal audit. Miriam was not dramatic, not easily impressed, and not interested in protecting anyone's comfort from the facts. By the next morning, Eleanor Vale had become Edith Lane, a temporary support worker assigned to the flagship store. Victor approved the staffing request without concern. People like Edith Lane were invisible by design, useful hands, not dangerous eyes. Eleanor returned before dawn, when the bakery had not yet put on its performance. The front lights were dim. The music had not started. The pastry case was still empty. Without customers and curated warmth, the store revealed its bones, racks of trays, flour on the floor, taped labels, tired appliances, and the steady rhythm of people working before anyone was awake enough to thank them. That was where Eleanor truly met Maya Reyes. Maya was not what Victor's report had described. She was not unstable. She was not difficult. She was a woman in her 30s with dark hair tied back, flour on her forearms, and the focused calm of someone who had learned to keep moving because stopping would allow exhaustion to catch her. She worked with quiet attention, not only to the dough, but to the people around her. When Edith struggled with the labeling system, Maya helped her without making her feel foolish. She explained allergy tags, freezer notes, tray timing, and which boxes split if stacked too high. She also placed a warmer pair of gloves near Edith's station, pretending they had simply been left there. That small kindness almost hurt more than the insults had. Cruelty confirmed what Eleanor feared. Kindness showed her what was being wasted. Over the next hours, Eleanor watched Maya hold the store together from the shadows. Maya adjusted oven temperatures before a batch could burn. She corrected an inventory mistake that would have left the store short by Friday. She softened a citrus glaze that had been mixed too sharply. She prepared a low-sugar honey bun and set it aside with Samuel's name written neatly on the bag. She remembered that one nurse preferred oat milk, but no vanilla. She saved broken pastry ends for the delivery rider, who came in cold after the morning route. None of it showed on a dashboard. None of it appeared in Victor's reports. But without Maya, the flagship store would have been nothing more than expensive lighting around an empty heart. When Brielle and Kendra arrived for the day shift, the room changed. Brielle swept in wearing perfume and confidence, already complaining about flour near the proofing station. Kendra followed with coffee from another shop, which Eleanor noticed immediately because employees were supposed to drink Hearth and Hollow products while on shift. They walked through the bakery as if morning began when they entered, as if the trays, the notes, the warm buns, and the prepared counter had somehow created themselves. Maya handed over the production notes. Brielle barely looked at them. Kendra asked whether the honey buns were finally consistent, a question designed to sound professional while reminding everyone that Maya's work was always on trial. Maya explained that humidity had affected the dough and that she had adjusted the rest time. Later that morning, Eleanor heard Brielle repeat the same detail to Victor over the phone, as if it had been her own observation. Eleanor said nothing, but she remembered. As Edith, she worked several shifts over the next few days. She wiped tables, unpacked deliveries, sorted sleeves, and listened. She learned that the official tip policy and the real tip practice were not the same. On paper, tips were shared among eligible hourly employees based on hours worked. In practice, Brielle and Kendra controlled a second calculation. They called it front weighting. They claimed that the people who shaped the guest experience deserved more. By that, they meant themselves. Night bakers, dish staff, prep workers, and cleaners received whatever remained after the front counter took its invisible cut. Sometimes the theft was cash removed before counting. Sometimes it was digital tips assigned under the wrong shift category. Sometimes it was a handwritten adjustment justified by customer-facing performance. The amounts were small enough to hide in daily noise, but over 14 months, small theft had become real money. For Brielle and Kendra, it meant extra spending money. For the workers they stole from, it meant delayed bills, cheaper groceries, and bus fare counted twice. Maya had noticed. She had filed complaints, but every complaint disappeared into Victor's office and came back labeled as resolved through coaching. The family connection came from a careless sentence. One evening, Kendra complained that Victor always protected Brielle because of family dinners. Brielle snapped at her to be careful where she said things, then reminded her that Victor was not technically her father. The word technically did not erase the truth. Miriam confirmed it the next day. Victor Harlan was married to Brielle's mother. He had supervised Brielle's promotions, closed complaints against her, and never disclosed the conflict of interest. Now the pattern was clear. Brielle was not simply arrogant. She was protected. Kendra was not simply cruel. She was useful to someone protected. And Victor was not simply negligent. He had built a locked gate around the truth. Still, the most important evidence was the notebook. Maya kept it wrapped in parchment and hidden inside an old flour tin in the storage room. Eleanor first saw it when Kendra nearly found it during a closing shift. Papers slid across the floor, and Eleanor helped gather them before anyone else could look too closely. She saw dates, sketches, ingredient ratios, customer notes, and small drawings of lighthouses in the margins. She saw early versions of the sunrise honey buns, notes about clover honey, oven temperature, texture, and how the glaze should catch the light without becoming sticky. She saw a sentence written beside one recipe. "Make it taste like morning is forgiving you." That sentence stayed with her. Miriam pulled Victor's national launch presentation that night. In it, Victor described the sunrise honey bun as a signature expression of morning comfort, designed to make morning feel forgiving. The wording was too close to be coincidence, and the dates were worse. Maya's drafts came months before Victor's proposal. He had not stolen only a recipe. He had stolen the language of her heart. The launch was scheduled for Monday. Victor arrived at the flagship on Friday afternoon, wearing a navy coat, polished shoes, and the calm expression of a man visiting property rather than people. The staff changed around him. Brielle became brighter. Kendra became useful. The shift lid stood straighter. Even the store seemed to perform for him. Eleanor kept her head down and wiped tables. Victor praised the pastry case. He complimented Brielle on presentation. He talked about excellence, consistency, and protecting the Hearth and Hollow experience. Every phrase sounded reasonable until Eleanor looked at Maya standing near the back kitchen, listening to her own work being celebrated without her name. Then Victor turned to Maya. His voice stayed smooth, but the room understood smoothness could bruise. He mentioned concerns about attitude. He mentioned intellectual property boundaries. He mentioned the seriousness of keeping company product materials within approved systems. Maya tried to explain, but his authority silenced her before his words did. Brielle watched with satisfaction. Kendra looked relieved. The other employees looked down, not because they believed Victor, but because people who live paycheck to paycheck know the cost of eye contact. Victor announced that Maya would be placed on final review through the weekend. Her access to product development materials would be restricted. Her participation in Monday's launch preparation would be suspended. The official reason would be process compliance. The real reason stood naked in the room. They were taking her work, then punishing her for remembering it was hers. Maya did not cry. That seemed to irritate Brielle more than tears would have. Maya only asked whether she was still expected to complete the night bake before the review began. Even while being humiliated, she thought of the customers who would come in the morning. She thought of the people who had done nothing to her and still deserved something warm. That was when Eleanor understood something important. Maya was not just a talented employee. She was the keeper of the original promise. She was what Hearth and Hollow had been before it became polished enough for people like Victor to exploit. But knowing the truth was not enough. Eleanor needed proof strong enough to survive denials, lawyers, edited memories, and the polished outrage of guilty people caught too late. So she waited. She let Victor believe Monday would belong to him. She let Brielle believe Maya's ending had already been written. She let Kendra keep her little notebook beneath the register. And behind the scenes, Miriam's team gathered everything. They pulled digital tip records and compared them with cash deposits. They found adjustments clustered around Brielle's shifts. They found camera outages during tip counts. They recovered deleted scheduling messages. They traced 6 complaints from Maya, all closed by Victor's office. 1 complaint mentioned tip theft. 1 mentioned customer discrimination. 1 mentioned the velvet list. 1 mentioned that Victor had used Maya's recipe language in a regional report. The final complaint contained almost the same sentence as the anonymous envelope. Ask who really bakes the sunrise buns. All 6 had been buried. Saturday brought the incident that removed any last hesitation. The bakery was busy, the kind of bright morning that made the store look like a commercial. Brielle and Kendra were in full performance for the customers they liked, offering samples and smiling beneath the slogan. Maya worked in the back, officially restricted from product development, but still responsible for keeping the pastry case full, because hypocrisy often depends on the labor of the people it punishes. Samuel came in later than usual, holding his navy cap and a folded photograph in his coat pocket. Eleanor later learned that it was his wedding anniversary. He had spent the morning at the cemetery visiting June. For 13 years, they had marked the day with a honey bun at the window table. He ordered 1 sunrise honey bun and a small coffee. His coins spilled slightly on the counter. Not many, just enough to slow him down. Kendra sighed. Brielle glanced toward the line behind him and suggested with cruel politeness that some customers might be more comfortable taking their orders to go when seating was limited. The window table was empty. Samuel looked at it, then looked down. Then Brielle did something Eleanor would never forget. She took a honey bun from the display, placed it in a bag, then switched it with one from a tray marked for disposal beneath the counter. The movement was quick. Most customers would not have seen it. Eleanor saw it. So did Maya. The bun was not unsafe. It was simply old, flattened, and unworthy of the price he paid. A small theft of dignity wrapped in branded paper. Maya crossed from the kitchen before caution could stop her. She did not accuse Brielle. She did not create a scene. She simply took a fresh bun from the warm tray, placed it in a new bag, and made sure Samuel received that one instead. For one brief second, the bakery became what it was supposed to be. Samuel held the warm bag in both hands. His eyes filled quietly, not with drama, but with the surprise of a person who had braced for humiliation and received gentleness instead. He sat at the window table and placed the worn photograph beside his coffee. In it, a younger Samuel and June smiled over a shared pastry. Maya returned to the back. Brielle's face hardened. The punishment came after the rush. Victor arrived within an hour, which told Eleanor he had been waiting for an excuse. The staff gathered near the back counter. Victor framed the issue as insubordination. He said Maya had interfered with front-of-house service, undermined chain of command, and created confusion during peak volume. Brielle added her version with practiced sadness. Kendra supported every word. Maya stood alone. That was the part Eleanor would remember. Not Victor's lies, not Brielle's cruelty, not Kendra's eagerness. It was the silence of the others. The baker who knew Maya had saved entire shifts. The dishwasher who knew tips had gone missing. The junior cashier who had once cried in the freezer after Brielle mocked her accent. They all knew pieces of the truth, but fear held them still. Eleanor did not judge them easily. She had been poor enough to understand fear. But she also knew that silence is the soil where people like Victor grow strong. Victor told Maya that her employment would be reviewed Monday morning before the launch meeting. Until then, she was to surrender any personal notes related to bakery products, because company policy required product development materials to remain accessible to management. Maya's face changed for the first time. Not panic exactly, but a flash of terror. The notebook, her recipes, her proof. Everything they had taken from her had at least left fingerprints inside those pages. If Victor got the notebook, the last living record of the truth could disappear. Eleanor created a small distraction by knocking over a stack of empty pastry sleeves near the storage door. It was clumsy enough to be believable from an older temp worker. Kendra snapped at her. Brielle rolled her eyes. Victor looked annoyed. For 30 seconds, the room's focus shifted. That was all Maya needed. She slipped into the storage room and came out moments later, with her expression too controlled and her apron pocket slightly heavier. As she passed Edith, her hand brushed Eleanor's sleeve, and something small moved from one pocket to another. Later, in the restroom, Eleanor unfolded the scrap Maya had given her. It was not the whole notebook. It was a single torn page, the first draft of the sunrise honey bun recipe, dated 11 months before Victor's proposal. At the bottom was the lighthouse. Beneath it was one sentence in blue ink. For the people who come in before the world has been kind to them. Eleanor stood in the restroom of her own flagship store, holding proof that the company's most celebrated new product had been born from the heart of a woman they were preparing to erase. By Sunday night, the trap was ready. Not a cruel trap. Eleanor did not believe cruelty could repair cruelty. She believed in truth arranged so carefully that lies had nowhere left to stand. Miriam had the audit files. Legal had the employment records. Human Resources had been instructed to attend Monday's launch meeting without informing Victor why. The board's ethics chair had been quietly briefed. Camera footage had been preserved from cloud backups Brielle thought had failed. The digital tip logs had been matched against deposits. Deleted scheduling messages had been recovered. The anonymous envelope, Maya's torn recipe page, and Victor's presentation were placed in one folder. Still, Eleanor needed one more thing. Maya's notebook had to be protected before Victor could take it. She found Maya after closing, sitting alone on an overturned crate near the dry storage shelves. The ovens had cooled. The bakery lights were low. Without music, customers, or performance, the room felt almost like the first Hearth and Hollow again, back when warmth came from work instead of design. Maya looked exhausted in a way sleep would not fix. Eleanor sat nearby, still wearing Edith's raincoat. For a while, neither of them spoke. Sometimes trust cannot be rushed with questions. Sometimes the most honest thing one person can give another is enough silence to decide whether the truth is safe. Maya eventually explained that she wrote everything down because memory was easy for powerful people to challenge. She wrote down dates because managers changed stories. She sketched lighthouses beside recipes that felt important because her daughter liked lighthouses. Maya had once told her daughter that a lighthouse was proof that even in darkness, someone could choose to keep a light burning for people they might never meet. That was why she had painted one on the tip jar. The tip jar had been her small attempt to make the team feel shared. Back when she still believed shared effort meant shared reward, she brought in an old blue ceramic jar and painted a lighthouse on it after her daughter went to bed. Across the front, she wrote, "For everyone who keeps the light on." For a few weeks, people smiled at it. Then Brielle taped a note over Maya's words, limiting tips to day staff only. No manager removed it. No one wanted conflict. Over time, the paper yellowed at the edges, and unfairness became part of the counter. Maya said she had stopped expecting anyone to fix it. That sentence hurt Eleanor because it named the deepest failure of leadership. Not that wrong had happened. Wrong always finds a way into human systems. The failure was that a good employee had stopped believing the truth had somewhere to go. Eleanor wanted to reveal herself then. She wanted to tell Maya that Monday would not unfold the way Victor expected. But revealing too early might put Maya in a position she had not chosen. So she asked only whether the notebook was safe. Maya looked at her for a long time. Maybe part of her sensed that Edith was not just a temp worker. Maybe she was too tired to name the possibility. But finally, she reached behind a flower bin and removed the wrapped notebook. She did not hand it over immediately. Her fingers tightened around it. Eleanor understood. That notebook was not just evidence. It was Maya's voice in a place that had tried to speak over her. It held late nights, failed batches, customer notes, her daughter's little drawings, and the proof that she had existed as more than labor. Eleanor promised, without revealing everything, that no one who had stolen from her would be allowed to keep deciding what the truth was worth. Maya studied her face. Then slowly, she let the notebook go. Eleanor took it with both hands. Monday morning arrived bright and cold. The flagship store opened early for the regional launch meeting. The pastry case gleamed. The sunrise honey buns sat in perfect rows, brushed with honey, until they caught the light like small golden promises. A banner announced the national rollout. Victor had arranged everything carefully. Brielle wore her best smile. Kendra had curled her hair. Maya had been told to report before her review. To everyone in that room, Monday had a script. Victor would praise the launch. Brielle would be recognized for front-of-house excellence. Kendra would stand close enough to share the glow. Maya would be disciplined, possibly fired, and her notebook would disappear into management custody. The national campaign would move forward. The company would sell millions of buns under a story stolen from the woman who woke before dawn to bake them. That was the script they expected. Then Edith Lane walked in. Brielle frowned, irritated that the temp worker had appeared during a high-level meeting. Kendra whispered something under her breath. Victor began to explain that temporary support staff were not needed and that Edith could wait in the back. But Edith did not move to the back. She walked to the side of the room and placed the old blue ceramic tip jar on the table. The yellowed paper still clung to its front, the one that said, "Day staff only." Beneath the peeling edge, just visible, was the painted beam of a lighthouse. Maya went still. Brielle's smile vanished. Victor looked at the jar, then at Edith, and for the first time since Eleanor had met him, something unpolished flickered across his face. The front door opened again. Miriam Chen entered with 2 members of the audit team. Behind her came the head of human resources, company legal counsel, and the board's ethics chair. No one spoke loudly. They did not need to. Real authority has a different weight from performance. It does not have to decorate itself. Victor tried to recover. He greeted them with controlled surprise and began shaping an explanation before he even knew what had to be explained. Eleanor reached up and removed the gray scarf from her hair, then the cap, then the raincoat. For several seconds, the only sound in the flagship was the low hum of refrigeration behind the pastry case. The woman they had ignored, mocked, underpaid, and ordered out of the way was no longer Edith Lane. She was Eleanor Vale, founder and CEO of Hearth and Hollow Bakery. The name on the building, the face from the anniversary videos, the woman whose childhood promise had been printed on every cup in the store. And she had heard enough. She began not with anger, but with memory. She reminded the room that Hearth and Hollow had not been created to impress wealthy customers or polish itself into a brand too delicate for ordinary people. It had been created because once, A mother and daughter, with very little money, were made to feel unworthy of a warm table. Every cup, every bag, every training manual, every painted wall that carried the words, "Warmth belongs to everyone," existed because of that promise. Somewhere inside this flagship, the promise had been turned into decoration. No one interrupted. Victor's expression remained controlled, but the color had begun to drain from his face. Brielle looked toward the windows, as if calculating who might be watching. Kendra folded her arms too tightly, trying to become small after years of making others feel small. Maya stood near the back, still in her work apron, afraid to trust what was happening. Eleanor described what she had seen as Edith Lane, the stale croissant, the coins treated like contamination, Samuel being steered away from the window table, nurses, delivery riders, construction workers, and elderly customers being treated as though their presence lowered the value of the room. She did not exaggerate. Cruelty rarely needs embellishment when it is finally named plainly. Then Miriam placed the first folder on the table. It held customer complaints that had never reached the executive office. Some were formal, some were anonymous. Some were written by employees who had watched customers leave in shame. Each complaint had been softened, reworded, or closed before it could become a problem for the people causing the harm. The phrase repeated again and again, resolved through coaching. In this store, coaching had not meant correction, it had meant burial. The second folder held the tip records. Kendra began to tremble. The audit team had reconstructed 14 months of tip distribution across cash, digital payments, shift edits, and deposit logs. The numbers told a story no one could laugh away. Front counter staff had received far more than policy allowed. Night bakers, dish staff, prep workers, cleaners, and temporary support workers had been systematically underpaid. Cash counts had been changed during shifts where cameras went offline. Digital tips had been routed under categories that favored Brielle and Kendra. Eleanor explained that stealing from workers did not become less serious because it happened in small amounts. It became more shameful because it targeted people least able to absorb the loss. Maya looked down, not because she was ashamed, but because the truth of what had been taken from her had finally been measured. A number can prove what your body already knew. A number can show that you were not imagining the unfairness. A number can turn months of quiet insult into evidence. Victor tried to step in. He began shaping the issue as an administrative breakdown, a training gap, a lack of clarity around policy. The words came easily, dressed in professionalism. But Eleanor knew the language of escape. She opened the third folder. This one contained the complaint trail. 6 formal complaints from Maya Reyes, one about tip distribution, one about discriminatory service, one about a delivery worker refused water, one about the velvet list, one about product ownership, one marked urgent, asking who really baked the sunrise buns. All 6 had been routed to Victor's office. All 6 had been closed before reaching Human Resources or the Ethics Board. Victor stopped speaking. There are moments when guilt becomes visible not through confession, but through the failure to keep pretending. His eyes moved once toward Brielle. It was a small mistake, but the room saw it. Eleanor revealed the undisclosed relationship next. Victor Harlan was married to Brielle's mother. He had supervised Brielle's promotions, closed complaints against her, approved disciplinary notes against employees who challenged her, and never disclosed the conflict. Nepotism might sound like an office rumor until the damage is placed beside it. Here, the damage had names: Maya, Samuel, the nurses, the delivery rider, the night bakers, the dish staff, the workers whose tips were shaved down while Brielle's authority grew. Brielle began to cry, but there is a difference between tears of remorse and tears of exposure. Remorse looks toward the people harmed. Exposure looks inward, toward what the guilty person is about to lose. Brielle's tears did not find Samuel. They did not find Maya. They turned back toward herself. Kendra tried to make herself smaller. She wanted the room to believe she had only followed Brielle, only repeated jokes, only done what the front counter culture demanded. Eleanor did not accept that. A person may not design a cruel system and still choose to enjoy it. Kendra had kept the velvet list beneath the register. Kendra had used it. She had helped decide who received slow service, old pastries, cold eyes, and shame disguised as atmosphere. Then Miriam placed the small notebook from beneath the register beside the tip jar. The velvet list looked harmless from the outside, with a little gold pattern on the cover. Inside were descriptions and labels for customers the cashiers had chosen to discourage: coin man, raincoat woman, scrub ghosts, delivery kid, bench sleeper, slow widow. There were notes about who tipped badly, who paid in change, who took too long, who lowered the look of the room, who should be told seats were limited even when they were not. Samuel had been listed too, not by name at first, but by description: old bus cap, window table, pennies, anniversary mornings. Maya covered her mouth. She knew what those mornings meant to Samuel. She knew because she had bothered to learn. Brielle and Kendra had known enough to use his tenderness against him. That was the difference between service and cruelty. Both notice details. One uses them to care. The other uses them to wound. Samuel had agreed to come in if needed, and Eleanor had made sure he would not be turned into a spectacle. He entered quietly, holding his navy cap. The room shifted with discomfort. People often prefer victims to remain abstract. Numbers can be reviewed. Complaints can be filed. But a person standing in front of you with hurt in his eyes removes the luxury of distance. Samuel did not accuse loudly. He was not built for public anger. His presence was testimony enough. Eleanor summarized what had happened to him with care. He had been a loyal customer since the early days. He had shared this store with his wife. After she passed, the window table helped him remember a part of his life grief had not taken. The cruelty done to him was not just bad service. It was the disrespect of a memory. Samuel placed the worn photograph of himself and June beside the tip jar. In the picture, they sat at the window table, smiling over a shared pastry. It was evidence of another kind, evidence that the people reduced to categories had lives, loves, rituals, and losses. Brielle could not look at him. Only after Samuel was offered the window table did Eleanor turn to the matter everyone had feared most: the sunrise honey buns. On the display table, beneath the tasteful launch sign, the pastries gleamed as if innocent of the theft surrounding them. They were beautiful. That was part of the pain. Maya's work was beautiful. Her care had survived even in the hands of people who wanted her erased. Victor had mistaken that beauty for a product he could own. Eleanor opened Maya's notebook. Maya inhaled sharply, but Eleanor looked toward her first, making it clear that the notebook was not being taken from her anymore. It was being recognized. The pages were shown to the room. Dates appeared, ingredient tests, failed versions. notes about humidity, glaze texture, customer memories, a sketch of a bun designed to catch light, the phrase about making morning feel forgiving, the lighthouse drawn beside the final version. Then Miriam displayed Victor's regional proposal, submitted months later using nearly identical language and product notes that followed Maya's development path almost exactly. Victor tried one final defense. He claimed that ideas developed within store operations belonged to the company. He implied that Maya misunderstood collaborative innovation. He suggested that leadership refined, scattered contributions into scalable products. It sounded intelligent until Eleanor placed one more document on the table. It was the employee innovation policy she herself had approved years earlier. The policy stated clearly that employees who created products selected for regional or national rollout were to receive formal credit, a development bonus, and internal royalty compensation were applicable. Eleanor had insisted on that policy because she knew creativity did not only live in corporate test kitchens. Sometimes it lived in tired people working odd hours, listening closely to customers no executive ever met. Victor had violated policy. More than that, he had violated trust. The room no longer belonged to him. It belonged, finally, to the truth. Eleanor then did what everyone had expected Victor to do to Maya. She began the review. But it was not Maya's employment being reviewed. It was the conduct of the people who had built a private kingdom inside a company that was supposed to serve everyone. Brielle Voss was terminated first. Eleanor stated the reasons clearly: discriminatory treatment of customers, retaliation against co-workers, manipulation of tip distribution, and participation in a hostile store culture that directly contradicted company values. Her quarterly bonus would be frozen pending legal review of stolen tips. The matter would be documented fully, not softened into personality conflict, not hidden behind coaching language, and not buried to protect the brand from embarrassment. Brielle looked stunned, as if she had never truly believed consequences were meant for people like her. She had mistaken favoritism for invincibility. Now the shield was gone, and all that remained was the record of what she had done when she thought no one powerful was watching. Kendra Pike was terminated next. Eleanor did not allow her lesser rank to become a hiding place. Kendra had kept the velvet list, helped manipulate tips, participated in customer mistreatment, and turned cruelty into entertainment. Her fear in that moment could not erase the fear she had caused in others. Then Eleanor turned to Victor. The bakery seemed to hold its breath. Victor Harlan was terminated for cause, not asked to resign, not reassigned, not allowed to call it a mutual decision. Terminated. The reasons were placed into the record one by one: undisclosed conflict of interest, retaliation against employees, suppression of formal complaints, falsification of internal summaries, failure to enforce tip policy, theft of employee-created product work, and conduct unbecoming of leadership. His innovation bonuses connected to Maya's recipes would be clawed back. His regional launch authority was revoked immediately. Legal counsel would determine further action based on the financial and intellectual property review. Victor did not rage. Rage would have been too honest. Instead, he looked offended, as if the greater injustice was that his Polish had failed to protect him. When security escorted him out, he passed the wall where the slogan was painted: "Warmth belongs to everyone." For the first time, the words seemed to be looking back at him. But justice could not end with firing the guilty. Punishment stops the breaking from continuing. It does not repair what has already been broken. So Eleanor turned to the staff. This was the harder part. It would have been easy to treat everyone else as innocent because they had not been the loudest. It would have been easy to let the room applaud the fall of villains. But Eleanor had seen too much silence to leave it untouched. She told them that fear was real. She would not pretend childcare, medical bills, and survival did not shape the courage people felt able to show. But she also told them that a company becomes cruel not only when cruel people act, but when decent people decide that looking away is safer than standing beside someone being harmed. No one was fired for being afraid that morning, but no one was allowed to call fear a virtue. Hearth and Hollow would retrain the flagship from the ground up. The regional complaint process would be removed from manager control. Employees would receive direct access to an independent ethics channel. Tip distribution would become transparent on every paycheck. Digital records would be visible to eligible staff. Camera outages during cash handling would trigger automatic review. Undisclosed family reporting relationships would require immediate investigation. And every employee, from the front counter to the dish station to night production, would be treated as part of the guest experience, because the warmth customers feel in the morning often begins with someone unseen working in the dark. Then Eleanor faced Maya. For a moment, the founder of a 58-store company seemed less like a CEO and more like the little girl who once sat near a restroom with her mother, promising herself that someday she would build something kinder. She apologized, not with the easy apology of a public statement, but with the weight of a person taking responsibility for a system built in her name. She admitted that she had allowed reports to replace listening. She had allowed growth to create distance. She had believed the promise because she had written it, when she should have been checking whether others were living it. Maya did not know what to do with the apology. People who have been dismissed for too long sometimes struggle to receive recognition without bracing for the cost. Her eyes moved from Eleanor to the notebook, then to the honey buns in the case, then to the staff who had watched her be corrected, reduced, and nearly erased. Eleanor announced that the national rollout would continue, but it would be corrected. The Sunrise Honey Buns would launch under Maya Reyes's name. Every menu board, training document, product story, and marketing asset would identify her as the creator. She would receive the product development bonus she should have received months earlier, along with back compensation for the internal royalty period Victor had stolen. Her notebook would remain hers, with copies made only by consent and only for documenting authorship. And if Maya chose to continue developing products for Hearth and Hollow, it would be through a formal role with salary, schedule protection, and creative authority. Maya's hand went to the edge of the prep table as if the room had tilted. For so long, her work had been treated as something that could be taken because she needed the job too much to fight back. Now the same work was being named in front of everyone, not borrowed, not inspired by, not refined from a team concept, created by Maya Reyes. Eleanor offered her the position of Regional Product Development Lead for Community Bakery Innovation. It was a role designed not to remove Maya from the people who inspired her work, but to give her the power to bring their stories into the menu without letting anyone steal the credit again. Maya did not answer immediately. The silence was not rejection. It was the sound of a person trying to let dignity return to places where humiliation had been stored. Then Maya nodded. The room exhaled. It would be tempting to say everything changed in that instant. Stories often like clean turning points. But real healing is rarely so neat. The employees who had stayed silent did not become brave all at once. The customers who had been wounded did not magically forget. Maya did not walk out untouched by what had been done to her. Eleanor did not forgive herself simply because she had finally acted. Justice can open a door, but people still have to walk through, carrying the weight of what came before. Yet something real did change. Eleanor reached for the blue tip jar. She peeled away the yellowed paper Brielle had taped across it. The adhesive resisted at first, as if unfairness had become comfortable there. Then the paper tore free. Beneath it, the original words appeared in Maya's careful painted lettering. For everyone who keeps the light on. No one clapped. It would have felt too small, too theatrical. Instead, the staff stood in a silence that finally had respect inside it. Maya touched the jar with her fingertips. The lighthouse she had painted years earlier looked imperfect and beautiful, its beam stretching across the curve of the ceramic. She had made it after putting her daughter to bed, during a time when she still believed the store could become a shared place. That belief had been mocked, covered, and nearly broken. But it had not been erased. The repairs began that week. Every underpaid employee received corrected tip payments, covering 14 months, with interest. For some, it was a few $100s. For others, it was enough to catch up on rent, repair a car, pay a medical bill, or buy groceries without calculating every item twice. Eleanor personally signed the letters that accompanied the payments, though she knew a letter could not undo the insult of needing money that had been yours all along. The flagship closed for retraining, not for a cosmetic renovation, for a reckoning. The polished tables stayed. The pastry case stayed. The slogan stayed. But the meaning of the room changed because the people inside it were forced to face what they had allowed. Several employees apologized to Maya privately. Some apologies were awkward. Some were late. Some were more about guilt than repair. Maya accepted none too quickly. She had learned that kindness without change could become another performance. But over time, she allowed certain people to earn back small pieces of trust. The junior cashier who had once stayed silent began arriving early to help night staff transition into morning service. The dishwasher, who had feared losing hours, joined the new employee council. The shift lead who had let Brielle dominate the front counter stepped down from leadership until retraining was complete. Not everyone became noble, but some became honest, and honesty was a beginning. Samuel returned on the reopening morning. There were no cameras invited. Eleanor refused to turn his pain into a marketing campaign. No press release mentioned him. No staged photograph was posted. Maya baked the first tray herself, though her new role no longer required her to arrive before dawn. She said she wanted to make this batch with her own hands, not for the company, for the table by the window. When Samuel entered, he paused the way he always did. The room was different, though the furniture had not moved much. The difference was in the attention. No one rushed him. No one sighed at his coins. No one steered him away from sunlight. A fresh sunrise honey bun waited for him, not as charity, not as apology wrapped in pity, but as the restoration of ordinary respect. Maya had written his name on the bag in blue ink. Samuel sat at the window table and placed June's photograph beside his coffee. For a while, he simply looked at the pastry. Grief does not disappear because a bakery becomes kinder. A dead wife does not return because a table is saved. But cruelty had added an unnecessary wound to Samuel's mourning, and that wound, at least, could be tended. He broke the bun in half, as he used to do when June was alive. One half remained on the napkin across from him. Maya turned away for a moment, not because she wanted to hide from sadness, but because some forms of love are too private to stare at directly. Eleanor watched from a distance. She thought of her mother. She thought of that winter bakery. She thought of how easily a child's wound had become a company, and how easily a company had almost become the very thing that caused the wound. That was the danger of success. It could make people forget that every polished system began as someone's answer to pain. Maya's new work changed Hearth and Hollow slowly. She did not create products by chasing trends. She listened. She visited night crews, bus depots, hospital break rooms, laundromats, early morning markets, and stores where employees had spent years believing their ideas did not count. She asked workers what they ate when no one saw them. She asked widows what food reminded them of being loved. She asked parents what they bought when they had enough for only one treat. From those answers came pastries that did not feel invented by a committee. They felt remembered into being. The first menu under Maya's leadership kept the sunrise honey bun in its place, but now the menu card carried her name clearly. Created by Maya Reyes, some customers barely noticed. Employees noticed most of all. In break rooms across the region, bakers who had spent years believing ideas only counted when managers repeated them began writing things down. Dishwashers suggested waste-reducing fillings. Baristas proposed pairings based on regulars they knew by heart. Prep workers shared family breads. The company discovered that creativity had never been scarce. It had only been ignored. Eleanor changed, too. She stopped trusting beautiful reports without ugly questions. She visited stores without warning, not to frighten people, but to listen before language became polished. She created a monthly founders table where employees from any level could speak without regional managers in the room. She tied leadership bonuses not only to revenue, but to staff retention, complaint resolution quality, tip transparency, and customer dignity. Some executives resisted the changes quietly. They worried about cost, complexity, exposure, and risk. Eleanor reminded them that the greater risk had already walked through the flagship wearing a raincoat and carrying coins. A company that cannot survive honesty does not deserve protection from it. As for Victor, Brielle, and Kendra, their consequences continued beyond that Monday. Victor lost his innovation bonuses and his reputation for calm excellence. Once the stolen labor and borrowed language were removed, there was little left behind his polished vocabulary. Brielle learned that charm and family protection could open doors, but could not keep them open after trust was gone. Kendra learned that cruelty enjoyed in groups can still be accounted for individually. None of them were destroyed for entertainment. They were simply made to live in a world where the consequences they had given others finally reached them. That was poetic justice, not because it was dramatic, but because it was exact. They had made people feel unwelcome, and they lost their place in the company. They had stolen tips, and the money was taken back. Victor had erased Maya's name, and his own name was removed from the launch he had tried to claim. Brielle had covered the lighthouse on the tip jar, and now the whole company saw what she had tried to hide. Months later, on a cold morning much like the one that had first brought Eleanor's mother into that old bakery decades ago, the flagship store filled before sunrise. Not with influencers, not with investors, not with people chosen for how well they matched the brand. It filled with bus drivers, nurses, office workers, parents, delivery riders, Retirees, students, and construction crews warming their hands around paper cups. Some paid with cards, some paid with cash, some counted coins. No one behind the counter made them feel smaller for it. Maya stood near the pastry case, no longer hidden in the back unless she chose to be. Her daughter Lucia had come in before school, wearing a backpack nearly half her size. She pointed at the menu where her mother's name appeared beneath the sunrise honey bun. Children understand recognition more purely than adults do. To Lucia, those words meant her mother had made something beautiful, and the world had finally admitted it. Eleanor watched Maya lift her daughter so she could see the lighthouse tip jar on the counter. The original paint had been sealed to protect it, but its imperfections remained. The beam was uneven. The letters curved slightly. The blue glaze had a tiny chip near the base. No designer would have approved it as a national brand asset. That was why Eleanor loved it. It was not perfect. It was true. Samuel sat at the window table, his coffee steaming beside June's photograph. No one rushed him. No one treated his grief as an inconvenience. Sometimes Maya sat with him for a minute before her meetings. Sometimes they said very little. Warmth does not always need many words. Sometimes it is simply allowing someone to remain where love once found them. The slogan on the wall stayed the same. Warmth belongs to everyone. But after everything that happened, those words no longer felt like paint. They felt like a responsibility renewed each morning by the people who unlocked the doors, mixed the dough, wiped the tables, counted the tips, and chose how to see whoever walked in next. Because cruelty rarely enters a workplace wearing a monstrous face. Sometimes it wears a clean apron and a practiced smile. Sometimes it speaks in policy language. Sometimes it calls discrimination atmosphere, theft adjustment, retaliation coaching, and silence professionalism. And kindness, real kindness, is not proven by how warmly people treat someone powerful. Anyone can smile upward. Character is revealed in how people treat the tired woman with coins, the old man with a photograph, the night baker with flour on her sleeves, and the worker whose name is not printed anywhere yet. Eleanor learned that a company can lose its soul one small permission at a time, one ignored complaint, one stolen idea, one cruel joke, one old pastry handed to someone deemed unworthy of fresh bread, one manager who protects family instead of truth, one room full of people who see harm and decide silence is safer. But a soul can also be recovered. One honest act at a time, one complaint finally read, one notebook protected, one tip jar uncovered, one name restored, one table returned to a grieving man, one worker reminded that the light she kept burning in the dark was seen after all. Maya did not become important on the day Eleanor revealed the truth. She had always been important. Samuel did not become worthy when the CEO apologized. He had always been worthy. The night staff did not become part of the guest experience when policy finally recognized them. They had always been part of it. Justice did not create their value. Justice only forced the company to stop denying it. And maybe that is the lesson worth carrying beyond one bakery, one counter, one stolen recipe, or one hidden notebook. Kindness is not a slogan on a wall. It is not a polished logo, a seasonal campaign, or a sentence printed on a cup. Kindness is what remains when no one is filming, when the customer has no influence, when the employee has no protection, when the complaint would be easier to bury, and when doing the right thing costs more than saying the right thing. So the next time you stand in line and see someone being treated as if they do not belong, remember Samuel at the window table. Remember Maya in the night kitchen. Remember the old blue tip jar with the lighthouse painted on it. And remember that silence may feel safe in the moment, but it always helps someone build a darker room. If you believe every hardworking person deserves to be seen, leave a like and tell us in the comments. Would you have spoken up if you had been standing in that line? Before anyone knew his name, a soaked stranger walked into the restaurant looking like he might not survive another minute.
Do not let him near the tables.
Then his strength faded in the middle of lunch, and the room treated his need like something shameful to avoid. Only Naomi moved toward him, not because she was fearless, but because everyone else had chosen distance.
Somebody call emergency services now.
Naomi saw a human being where everyone else saw trouble, dirt, danger, or an interruption to their lunch.
Please, I'm sorry.
Kendra Blythe did not ask whether the man was breathing. She only saw him as a stain on her restaurant.
Stand up before you make this place look filthy.
Naomi had almost nothing left, but she spent her last money, so the stranger would not reach the hospital hungry.
Compassion is not in your job description. Take off the apron. You are done here. Use the back door. Even let her leave through the front door.
She sent Naomi into the rain like shame belonged to her. The customers who had watched Naomi kneel beside a dying man now watched her lose her job for it. Some looked away. Some looked embarrassed. Some looked relieved that the punishment had not landed on them. Only one person tried to follow her. A busboy named Isaiah, barely 19, took 2 steps forward before Kendra's stare pinned him back in place. He had 2 younger sisters and a mother on disability. Fear did what cruelty always depends on it to do. Naomi left with her apron folded in her hands, her final tip still trapped in Kendra's locked drawer, and rain soaking through her shoes by the time she reached the bus stop. That night, she told her Aunt Lottie only part of the truth. Lottie Reed was 68, though illness had aged her unevenly. Some mornings, she remembered entire hymns from childhood and the smell of Naomi's mother's perfume. Other mornings, she forgot the word for window. A stroke 3 years earlier had weakened her left side, and a slow fog had settled over her memory after that, arriving in patches that came and went without warning. Naomi had moved into the little apartment on Anson Street to care for her after Naomi's mother died of heart failure, because there had been no one else willing and no money for proper help. Naomi had once been on a different path. At 18, she had graduated near the top of her class, with a scholarship letter from a nursing program folded in a Bible on her mother's dresser. Teachers had called her steady. Counselors had called her promising. Her mother had called her the one who would break the cycle. But cycles do not break just because a letter says congratulations. Sometimes they tighten. Sometimes a hospital bill arrives. Sometimes a caregiver is needed more urgently than a dreamer. So Naomi traded lecture halls for double shifts, textbooks for order pads, and a future with clean white shoes for work shoes that pinched until her toes went numb. She did not regret caring for Lottie. Love was not the problem. The problem was that love did not pay rent, did not refill prescriptions, did not stop landlords from taping notices to doors. The problem was that people praised sacrifice from a distance, then punished the person making it for being tired. By dawn, after the longest night of her life, Naomi had calculated everything and found no answer. Without the diner, she had no paycheck. Without the paycheck, she had no rent. Without rent, Lottie could lose the only home she recognized. Naomi had prayed. but even prayer felt like it had to squeeze through a ceiling crowded with other desperate voices. Then the envelope came. It did not arrive in the mail. It did not come with a knock. It slid silently under the door just before sunrise, a pale blue rectangle against the scratched wooden floor. Naomi stared at it for several seconds before standing. Her first thought was that it might be another notice from the landlord. Her second was that she no longer had room in her chest for one more bad thing. The envelope had her name written across the front in dark ink, not printed. Written, Naomi Reed. The letters were careful, almost old-fashioned. There was no return address, only a small embossed mark in the corner, a lantern surrounded by 3 waves. Inside was not money. That almost disappointed her before she could stop herself. Inside was a single card, thick and expensive, with an address on East Bay Street and a request for her presence that morning at 9. Beneath the address was a line that made Naomi sit down before her knees could make the decision for her. It said that her act at the Mariners' table had not gone unseen. That was all. No explanation. No signature she recognized. Just that sentence, sitting in her lap like a match struck in a dark room. Naomi almost threw it away. People in trouble learn caution. Miracles, when they appear too suddenly, often come with hidden hooks. But the address belonged to the old Peabody House, a restored building near the harbor that Naomi knew only from passing it on the bus. It had once been a shipping office. Now, according to the brass plaque she had seen from the sidewalk, it belonged to something called the Lantern Harbor Foundation. She searched the name on her cracked phone. The screen loaded slowly, then showed a website full of polished photographs, food programs, mobile clinics, emergency shelters, legal aid, hurricane relief. The foundation had been started decades earlier by a shipping family that had turned old warehouse money into charity. Its current chair was a woman named Celeste Vane, known in Charleston for giving away money with one hand and guarding her privacy with the other. Naomi did not understand what any of it had to do with her. Still, at 8:30, after making sure Lottie had breakfast and leaving the neighbor with a number to call in case of trouble, Naomi put on her cleanest blouse, brushed lint from her coat, and took the bus toward East Bay Street. She carried the blue envelope in her bag like evidence in a trial no one had explained. The Peabody house looked even larger up close. Its windows were tall and arched, its brick washed clean by rain, its front steps flanked by planters full of white flowers that looked too expensive to touch. Naomi paused at the bottom step, suddenly aware of her shoes, her tired eyes, and the faint smell of diner grease still caught in her hair, no matter how carefully she had washed it. A security guard opened the door before she reached it. He did not ask whether she belonged. He said her name with respect and guided her inside. That unsettled her, more than suspicion would have. The lobby was warm and quiet. Not rich in the loud way of chandeliers and marble meant to impress, but in the deep, quiet way of places built by people who expect the world to move aside. Oil paintings lined the walls. A long table held brochures about flood relief and food access. Near the back, through a set of open doors, Naomi saw a conference room where 3 people stood waiting. One was Celeste Vane. She was in her 70s, silver-haired, straight-backed, and smaller than Naomi expected. Her face held the calm of someone who had survived more than her portrait suggested. Beside her stood a lawyer with a leather folder, and near the window, wrapped in a clean sweater, thinner but alive, was the man from the diner. Naomi stopped breathing for a moment. The man looked different without rainwater dripping from his coat. His beard had been trimmed. His skin still carried the grayness of recovery, but his eyes were clear. He was not polished. He was not suddenly transformed into someone untouched by pain, but he was alive. And when he saw Naomi, the shame in his expression changed into something more fragile and more difficult to bear: gratitude. Celeste Vane did not begin with grand speeches. She explained gently that the man Naomi had helped was named Adrian Vane, her only son. He had not been missing in the way newspapers like to describe missing heirs. His story was messier, more human, and far less convenient for gossip. Years earlier, after the death of his wife and little daughter in a highway accident, Adrian had withdrawn from the world he once helped serve. Grief had taken the shape of silence, then isolation, then a long wandering that no family money could easily fix. He had refused interviews, refused board meetings, refused even the name that tied him to wealth. For months, he had been living between shelters, ferry terminals, and hospital waiting rooms, convinced that the comfort of his family was something he no longer deserved. The foundation had searched for him quietly. Too much publicity could have turned his suffering into entertainment. Too much pressure could have driven him farther away. On the day Naomi found him, Adrian had been trying to reach the foundation office on foot after losing his medication and his wallet during a storm. He had made it only as far as the mariner's table. Every person in that restaurant had seen a problem. Naomi had seen a person. Celeste made sure Naomi understood that this difference had likely saved Adrian's life. The emergency physician had said another hour in the cold rain, with his blood sugar collapsing and his body weakened, might have ended very differently. The meal Naomi paid for had arrived with the paramedics' paperwork and had become the detail that made everyone at the hospital talk, not because of its cost, but because of what it cost Naomi. Naomi felt heat rise behind her eyes. She tried to say that anyone would have done the same, but even as the thought formed, she knew it was not true. Everyone had been there. Everyone had seen him. Most had chosen distance. Celeste then did something Naomi did not expect. She did not offer a reward in the crude way people sometimes pay for conscience, as if kindness were a lost wallet returned for a fee. Instead, she asked Naomi about her life, not with pity, not with the polished curiosity of donors touring poverty for an afternoon. She asked as if Naomi's answers mattered. Naomi did not tell everything at first. Pride has its own survival instinct. But Celeste had spent decades listening to people who were tired of needing help, and she knew how to wait. Slowly, Naomi told her about Lottie, the unpaid rent, the nursing scholarship that had expired, the diner job, and the way Kendra had dismissed her in front of a room full of witnesses. She left out the most humiliating details until Adrian, from beside the window, lowered his head as though each one had landed on him personally. By the end of the meeting, Naomi's life had changed in ways she could not immediately absorb. The Lantern Harbor Foundation offered her a position coordinating a new community meals program called Harbor Hands, which would partner with local restaurants to create emergency meal vouchers for people in crisis. The salary was more than double what she had made at the diner. The benefits included home care support that could help with Lottie's medical needs. The foundation's housing attorney would contact Naomi's landlord that afternoon to stop the eviction and settle the arrears from a hardship fund, not as charity tossed from above, but as stabilization for a caregiver who had been carrying too much alone. Naomi listened with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles ached. She had expected, at most, a thank you note. Perhaps a small check. Perhaps nothing she could rely on. She had not expected an opening. She had not expected someone to look at her years of sacrifice and see qualifications instead of weakness. Celeste explained that the foundation did not need someone who merely understood policy. It needed someone who understood hunger without making hungry people feel small. It needed someone who knew the difference between feeding a person and humiliating them. It needed someone who had proven, under pressure, that human dignity mattered even when it was inconvenient. Naomi accepted. But stories like Naomi's do not end the moment good news arrives. In real life, blessings often disturb the people who benefited from your struggle. And Kendra Blythe had built too much of her little kingdom on Naomi, staying silent, poor, and disposable to accept Naomi's rise quietly. At first, Kendra only heard rumors. A delivery driver mentioned that the waitress she had fired had been seen entering the Peabody house. A former customer called the restaurant, asking whether it was true that the woman who helped the collapsed man now worked for the Lantern Harbor Foundation. Isaiah, trying and failing to hide his smile, told another server that Naomi's rent had been handled and her aunt would get medical support. By closing time, Kendra was no longer angry. She was afraid. Fear is different in people who are used to having power. It does not make them humble. It makes them dangerous. Kendra knew things the staff did not. She knew that for nearly 2 years, she had been skimming from the cash drawer in small amounts that looked like counting errors. She knew she had been marking donated community meals as served, then pocketing the reimbursement money when the owner was away. She knew she had refused hungry people at the door while reporting that the restaurant had participated in local relief efforts. She knew the jar labeled "Storm Meal Fund" had been emptied by her hand more than once. Its coins and bills treated as a private bonus for the trouble of pretending to care. She also knew Naomi had noticed irregularities. Naomi had never accused her. Naomi had been too busy surviving. But she had asked questions. She had once wondered why a church group's prepaid meal vouchers were missing from the drawer. She had once found a voided receipt under the printer with Kendra's manager code on it. She had once given a free bowl of gumbo to a veteran after Kendra claimed the voucher program had ended, only for Naomi to discover the next week that the program was still active. At the time, Kendra had dismissed the questions as confusion. Now she saw them as threats. By the next morning, Kendra had created a new story. According to her, Naomi had not been fired for helping a stranger. Naomi had been fired after an internal review suggested she had stolen money from the register and used a medical emergency to distract from it. Kendra did not make the accusation loudly at first. She was too strategic. She let it leak in pieces, through staff whispers, through a carefully worded email to the restaurant owner, through a complaint sent to the Lantern Harbor Foundation's general inbox. The complaint claimed that Naomi Reed was dishonest, unstable, and unfit to handle charitable funds. To make the lie look official, Kendra pressured Isaiah to sign a witness note, stating that he had seen Naomi near the drawer before cash went missing. Isaiah refused at first. He said he had seen nothing like that. But Kendra knew his schedule, his family situation, and his fear of losing the only job close enough to home. She cut his hours in half for 1 week, then returned them with a warning hidden behind a smile. By the second week, Isaiah signed a statement he hated himself for signing. Kendra also convinced a prep cook named Marisol to say Naomi had been upset about money. That part was technically true, which made the lie harder to fight. Naomi had been upset about money because poverty had been pressing its knee against her chest for years. Kendra twisted that human truth into motive. When the foundation received the complaint, they did what responsible organizations must do. They placed Naomi on temporary administrative leave while the matter was reviewed. Celeste herself called Naomi and made it clear that leave was not judgment, but process. Still, the word leave felt like a door closing. Naomi had held her new job for only 11 days. The apartment that had begun to feel safe became heavy again. Lottie sensed Naomi's sadness even through the fog of her memory. Some evenings, she reached for Naomi's hand without knowing exactly why. Naomi tried not to cry in front of her. She had cried enough into dishwater, enough into bus windows, enough silently behind the walk-in freezer at the diner. She was tired of tears that changed nothing. What hurt most was not even the risk of losing the job. It was the precision of the lie. Kendra had chosen the accusation that would wound Naomi deepest because Naomi had spent her whole life guarding her integrity. Poor people learned that one mistake can become their whole identity. In the mouths of people looking for reasons to dismiss them, Naomi had always kept receipts, counted change twice, returned overpayments, corrected tips when customers wrote too much by accident. She knew how quickly a black woman in a service uniform could be called dishonest by someone whose own theft wore perfume and a manager badge. For 3 days, Naomi heard nothing. During those 3 days, Kendra enjoyed herself. She moved through the mariner's table with renewed sharpness, telling staff that consequences were finally catching up with people who played saint for attention. She pretended not to care when customers asked about Naomi, then made sure they received a version of events muddy enough to stain her. She even printed a new policy about employee conduct during emergencies, as if compassion had been a workplace hazard. But lies require maintenance. Truth can sit quietly and wait. The first crack came from Isaiah. Guilt can make a room feel too small. Isaiah stopped sleeping. He replayed the moment Naomi knelt beside Adrian, the way she had held his hand without flinching, the way everyone else, including him, had stood back. He replayed the moment Kendra pushed the witness note toward him and reminded him how many people wanted his job. He thought about his sisters, yes, but he also thought about what kind of man he was becoming if fear could make him harm the one person who had always treated him like he mattered. On the 4th morning, Isaiah went to the foundation office before his shift. He arrived shaking harder than Adrian had shaken in the diner, carrying a folded copy of the statement he had signed. He told the foundation's review attorney that it was false. He admitted Kendra had pressured him. He admitted he had never seen Naomi steal anything. He admitted something else, too. For months, he had watched Kendra remove cash from the Storm Meal Fund jar and replace donation vouchers with blank slips. That confession did not clear Naomi immediately, but it shifted the room. The second crack came from Marisol. She had been quiet for years because she needed work, and because Kendra had a way of making every immigrant employee feel one document away from disaster, whether that was true or not. Marisol had signed nothing, but she had allowed Kendra to use her name in the complaint. When she learned Isaiah had gone to the foundation, she did not want him standing alone. She brought what Kendra had forgotten existed: photographs. Months earlier, Marisol had photographed several prep lists and reimbursement sheets because Kendra kept blaming kitchen staff for missing voucher meals. At the time, Marisol had only wanted proof that the kitchen had prepared what it was told to prepare. But the photos showed a pattern. On days when the restaurant claimed to have served 20 donated meals, the kitchen had prepared 6. On days when reimbursement forms showed full distribution, staff meal logs showed no matching plates. Several forms had Kendra's manager code. Some had Naomi's initials forged badly enough that anyone who knew her handwriting could see the insult. The third crack came from Adrian. Recovery had not made him suddenly powerful in the way people imagine wealth fixes everything. He was still grieving. He still moved carefully through rooms. He still carried guilt like a second spine. But he had one thing Kendra had not counted on: memory sharpened by humiliation. Adrian remembered the man in the navy suit recording him when he fell. He remembered the angle of the phone. He remembered the table. He remembered the woman at the register who had complained about the interruption while filming half the room. The foundation's attorney tracked the video after a younger staff member found a clipped version online, posted without context, under a caption mocking the stranger on the floor. The internet, for all its cruelty, sometimes preserves what liars hope will disappear. The clipped version showed Naomi kneeling. It showed customers backing away. It showed Kendra standing with folded arms. But it did not show the register clearly. The foundation needed more. The restaurant's internal cameras, according to Kendra, had malfunctioned that day. The owner, Mr. Harlan Cho, was told the system had overwritten the footage. That should have ended the matter. It did not. Mr. Cho had inherited the mariner's table from his father, who had opened it after serving as a Navy cook. Harlan was not a cruel man, but he was an absent one. And absence in leadership often becomes permission for someone worse to take over. He had trusted Kendra because she kept the restaurant profitable and problems quiet. He had ignored small complaints because he was tired, overextended, and grieving his own divorce. When the Lantern Harbor Foundation contacted him directly, he expected a misunderstanding. Instead, he discovered that his security system had not failed. Kendra had disabled the local storage, but she had forgotten about the backup connected to the insurance provider after a break-in the previous year. The footage wasn't on the restaurant computer. It was in a secure archive she did not know how to erase. Harlan watched it alone first. He watched Naomi serving tables during the rush. He watched Adrian enter, soaked and unsteady. He watched the room recoil. He watched Naomi kneel while Kendra stood back. He watched Naomi ask for emergency help. He watched her pay at the register with her own debit card, not remove money from it. He watched Kendra take Naomi's apron and send her out the side door. Then Harlan kept watching. The archive held more than that day. It held weeks. It held Kendra opening the donation jar after closing. It held her removing envelopes from the voucher drawer. It held her entering manager codes during cash outs, voiding meals that had been paid for by community partners, and slipping bills into the side pocket of her blazer. It held her handing Isaiah the witness note in the storage hallway, pointing toward the schedule board, and making the threat clear even without audio. The truth had not needed to shout. It had needed someone to look. When Naomi was called back to the foundation office, she expected another question, another form, another polite expression from people deciding whether to believe her. Instead, she found Celeste, Adrian, Harlan Cho, Isaiah, Marisol, and the foundation attorney seated around the same conference table where hope had first begun to feel possible. Naomi stood at the doorway, uncertain whether she had entered a trial or a rescue. Celeste did not make her wait. She explained that the accusations had been withdrawn, disproven, and referred for further action. Harlan apologized, with a face so pale It seemed the shame had drained him. He admitted that his trust in Kendra had allowed harm to grow under his roof. Isaiah cried before he could finish his apology. Marisol kept her eyes lowered until Naomi crossed the room and touched her shoulder. Not because Naomi owed anyone comfort, but because she understood what fear could do to good people trapped under bad authority. Adrian said the least, but his presence said enough. He had been the man on the floor. Now he was one of the reasons the truth was standing. Naomi was cleared fully. Her leave was ended. Her name was restored. But restoration, for someone who has been publicly humiliated, is not simply a letter saying the matter is closed. A lie travels through people. It enters rooms before you do. It sits in the air, waiting to see whether you will defend yourself or shrink. Celeste understood that. So did Harlan. The Mariners' table held a staff meeting the following Monday before opening. This time, Naomi did not enter through the side door. She entered through the front. The same bell rang above her head, bright and careless, just as it had the day Adrian collapsed. But the room felt different now. The chairs were stacked on tables. The floor smelled of lemon cleaner. The staff stood near the counter, tense and quiet. Kendra was there too, though no longer behind the host stand. Her makeup was perfect, but her face had lost the confidence that once made people step aside. Harlan spoke first, not with the polished language of corporate apologies, but with the rough honesty of a man who had finally looked at what his neglect had cost. He told the staff that Naomi Reed had been wrongfully fired, falsely accused, and publicly mistreated for doing what every decent person in that room should have done. He confirmed that Kendra Blythe had been terminated for cause, and that evidence of theft, intimidation, falsification of records, and charity fraud had been turned over to the proper authorities. Kendra tried to hold herself stiff, as if posture could substitute for innocence. But there are moments when a person's own silence becomes a confession. She had spent years making others feel small under fluorescent lights. Now she stood under the same lights, while the room learned what she had done. The poetic justice was not loud, it was precise. Kendra had fired Naomi for feeding a hungry stranger, and now the theft that destroyed her reputation came from money meant to feed hungry strangers. She had accused Naomi of stealing from a register, and the register logs exposed her. She had used employees' fear to create false statements, and those same employees became the witnesses who helped undo her. She had sent Naomi through the side door in shame, and Naomi returned through the front, while Kendra left, escorted by the owner she had deceived. No one applauded. It was better that way. Applause might have made it feel like a performance. This was not a performance. It was accountability. Kendra's downfall did not end at the sidewalk. Investigators later found that the stolen voucher funds were larger than anyone first believed. Several small churches had paid the Mariners' table in advance to provide hot meals during storms, believing their donations had reached people who needed them. Some had not. A veterans group had sponsored meal cards that were quietly canceled in the system. A neighborhood relief fund had been billed for plates never served. Kendra had not merely stolen cash. She had stolen trust from people who gave what little they had to help others. The charges that followed did not make Naomi happy. She was not the kind of person who found joy in someone else's ruin. But she did feel something steadier than happiness. She felt the weight of a foot lifting from her neck. She felt the world, for once, refusing to ask the wounded person to be the only one who pays. Kendra tried to find another management job, But Charleston is smaller than pride imagines. People talk. Records travel. References matter. The same polished confidence that once opened doors now raised questions she could not answer. For the first time in years, Kendra had to live without the protection of a title and without people beneath her to blame. Naomi returned to the Lantern Harbor Foundation the next day, not as a woman rescued by luck, but as someone beginning the work she had been preparing for her whole life without knowing it. Harbor Hand started small. At first, it was only a list of 5 restaurants willing to keep emergency meal cards behind the counter. The cards were simple, with no public label that could embarrass the person using them. A church, a shelter nurse, a bus driver, or a school counselor could request one. The meal would be served without questions, without a speech, without making hunger prove itself worthy. Naomi insisted on that. Hunger had already humiliated people enough. She built the program from memory as much as training. She remembered the mother counting coins under the table. She remembered the veteran turned away over a missing voucher. She remembered Adrian's hand trembling on a cold tile floor while strangers measured whether he deserved to be touched. She remembered all the people she had served at the Mariners' table who were one bad week away from becoming invisible. Her first major policy was called the warm seat rule. Any participating restaurant that accepted foundation funds had to agree that a person in crisis could sit inside safely while waiting for help, even if they could not order immediately. No one would be forced back into rain because discomfort was bad for business. No one would be treated like a threat for needing warmth. Some restaurant owners resisted. They worried about image, customer complaints, and liability. Naomi listened. Then she told them, calmly and without accusation, that a business afraid of being seen helping hungry people was not actually afraid of liability. It was afraid of being reminded what community means. A surprising number signed after that. The Mariners' table became one of the first official partners. Harlan Cho did more than sign. He changed the restaurant. He installed transparent accounting for every donated meal. He created a staff emergency fund. He hired an outside manager with nonprofit experience. He raised wages modestly but meaningfully, because guilt without structural change is only emotion wearing a better suit. He also placed a small brass plaque near the entrance, not with Naomi's face or a dramatic version of the story, but with a simple line that said every person who entered hungry deserved to leave treated as human. Naomi did not ask for the plaque. At first, she did not even like it. She worried it made her one act of kindness seem exceptional when she believed it should have been ordinary. But Celeste told her that reminders were necessary because decency often disappears not from one grand act of evil, but from 100 small permissions to look away. Adrian slowly returned to himself, though not to the man he had been before tragedy. Some losses do not give back the original version of a person. They make something quieter, deeper, sometimes more compassionate, sometimes more fragile. He began volunteering with Harbor Hands, first behind the scenes, reviewing supply lists and helping design intake forms that did not shame people. Later, he trained with peer support counselors to work with people in grief, addiction recovery, and housing instability. He did not pretend his family name had saved him. In fact, he understood more clearly than anyone that it almost had not. Money had searched for him, but a waitress with $38 had reached him first. That truth changed him. His relationship with Celeste healed slowly. Mother and son had spent years separated by grief, guilt, and all the words each feared would injure the other. Naomi never intruded on that healing. She only noticed, over months, that Adrian stopped standing near exits during meetings. Celeste stopped looking at him as if he might vanish if she blinked. One afternoon, Naomi saw them walk together along the harbor after a fundraiser, not speaking much, simply sharing space. Sometimes that is what forgiveness looks like before it has language. At home, life changed too. The foundation helped Naomi and Lottie move from the drafty apartment on Anson Street into a small but bright unit near a park, with an elevator, reliable heat, and a window where Lottie could watch children chasing pigeons in the afternoon. The first night there, Lottie became agitated because the walls did not feel familiar. Naomi sat with her until the fear passed, describing each room softly, grounding her in the names of things. The next morning, Lottie woke and said the sunlight looked kind. Naomi cried in the kitchen where no one could see. For years, she had measured success in avoided disasters. Rent not late enough to evict. Medicine not empty enough to panic. Electricity not shut off yet. Shoes not broken beyond repair. Now she had space to imagine a life not built entirely around emergencies. She enrolled in evening courses toward a community health certification, not because she needed a title to prove her worth, but because the dream she had buried at 18 still had roots. The scholarship letter from long ago remained in her Bible, creased and yellowing. She did not look at it with grief anymore. She looked at it like evidence that the girl she had been was still somewhere inside the woman she had become, not lost, only waiting. Months passed, and Harbor Hands grew. What began with 5 restaurants became 15, then 28. A mobile meal van joined the program after hurricane season, exposed neighborhoods where older residents could not reach distribution sites. School counselors started calling when students came to class, hungry after weekends. Hospital social workers requested meal cards for discharged patients who had nowhere stable to go. Bus drivers carried small information cards because they were often the first to see who was sleeping where the city pretended not to look. Naomi worked harder than she ever had at the diner, but the work no longer shrank her. There is a difference between exhaustion that empties you and exhaustion that has meaning. She still had difficult days. She still dealt with budgets, skeptical donors, broken supply chains, and people who assumed compassion could be scheduled neatly between office hours. But she also saw men who had been ignored sit down to hot stew without being watched like criminals. She saw mothers receive grocery boxes before shame could force them to choose between pride and dinner. She saw restaurant workers begin to understand that dignity was not extra service, it was the meal. The story of Naomi's firing eventually reached local news, though Celeste did everything possible to keep it from turning into spectacle. Reporters wanted a clean headline: "Poor waitress saves rich heir. Villain manager exposed. Charity triumphs." But life is rarely that clean. Naomi agreed to one interview only after insisting that the focus remain on food insecurity and worker vulnerability, not on turning her into a saint. She was not a saint. She was a woman who had been tired, broke, and scared, and had still chosen to kneel. That distinction mattered. Saints are easy to admire because people imagine they are different from the rest of us. A tired woman choosing mercy with overdue bills in her pocket is much harder to ignore because she removes the excuse that kindness belongs only to people with spare time, spare money, or spotless lives. The interview aired on a Sunday evening. Naomi watched it with Lottie, who understood pieces of it. At one point, Lottie touched the screen when Naomi appeared, then looked at the real Naomi sitting beside her and smiled with sudden recognition. For one clear moment, the fog lifted enough for pride to pass through. Lottie remembered Naomi's mother then. She remembered the hospital. She remembered the little girl who used to line up dolls and pretend to check their temperatures. She remembered enough to tell Naomi, in her own wandering way, that her mother would have been proud. Naomi held that sentence for days. But the most important moment in Naomi's new life did not happen on television. It happened almost 1 year after the firing, on another rainy Tuesday afternoon, at the reopened Mariner's Table. The restaurant was hosting the launch of an expanded Harbor Hands partnership. There were donors, city officials, restaurant workers, shelter coordinators, and a few regular customers who remembered the old days with uncomfortable clarity. The event could have become polished and empty, the kind of gathering where people discuss hunger over catered trays. Naomi refused to let that happen. Instead of speeches first, she asked everyone to sit for a meal served family style. No VIP table, no reserved corner for donors, no separation between people with checks and people with lived experience. Adrian helped serve. Harlan cleared plates. Celeste sat beside a former shelter resident who now worked as a peer navigator. The room, once divided by fear and judgment, felt almost unfamiliar in its warmth. Near the end, Naomi stood where Kendra had once fired her. She did not describe Kendra with hatred. She did not need to. Hatred would have made Kendra too central to a story that had grown beyond her. Naomi spoke instead about the floor, the actual floor of the restaurant, the tile near table 6 where Adrian had collapsed. She said that every community has a floor like that, a place where someone falls and everyone else must decide what kind of person they are. Some step back, some record, some complain about the inconvenience, and sometimes one person kneels, not because they are fearless, but because they know what it feels like to need someone. She explained that Harbor Hands existed to make kneeling less lonely. It existed so mercy would not depend on one waitress risking her job or one stranger being connected to a powerful family. It existed because people should not have to be secretly important to be treated as worth saving. That line stayed with everyone. People should not have to be secretly important to be treated as worth saving. Adrian lowered his eyes when she said it. Celeste reached for his hand. Harlan looked toward the doorway, perhaps remembering all the people his restaurant had once allowed to be turned away. Isaiah, now promoted and studying hospitality management with foundation support, wiped his face quickly and pretended he had not. Marisol smiled openly, no longer afraid of being seen. After the event, when the room had emptied and rain softened the windows, Naomi stood for a moment by table 6. The tile had been repaired, where a crack once ran through it. Most people would never know anything had happened there. That seemed right to her. Sacred places do not always announce themselves. Sometimes they hide under ordinary tables in ordinary diners, waiting for ordinary people to make choices that echo farther than they can see. Naomi thought about the blue envelope that had slid under her door before dawn. For a long time, she had believed that envelope was the beginning of her rescue. Now she understood it differently. The rescue had begun earlier, on the floor, when she refused to let the room decide a man's value for her. The envelope had only carried the news that kindness, though delayed, had found its way back. And yet, she also knew kindness did not always return with a foundation job, a new apartment, or public vindication. Sometimes kindness returns quietly. Sometimes it returns years later, through a child who remembers being fed. Sometimes it returns only as the knowledge that you did not become cruel when cruelty would have been easier. That kind of return is harder to measure, but it is real. Naomi kept the blue envelope. She framed it in her office, not because of the address or the embossed lantern, but because of the sentence inside. Her act had not gone unseen. On difficult days, when funding was short or the need felt endless, she looked at that sentence and thought of all the unseen acts happening across the city. A cashier slipping a sandwich into a bag, a bus driver waiting an extra minute for an elderly passenger, a teacher sending food home without making a child explain, a nurse warming a blanket for someone no family had come to visit, a neighbor knocking on a door before the silence became permanent. The world is held together by people who do small mercies without witnesses. But Naomi also learned that mercy must become more than a moment. It must become policy. It must become systems. It must become wages, shelters, meal programs, honest records, and leaders who do not leave vulnerable workers at the mercy of petty tyrants. One good person can save a life. A good community can stop that life from falling so far in the first place. Years later, when people asked Naomi why she helped Adrian that day, they expected a dramatic answer. They expected her to say she sensed he was important, or that fate whispered to her, or that she had some grand vision of what would follow. She always disappointed them gently. She explained that she had no idea who he was. She did not see a foundation heir, a lost son, or a future partner in a citywide program. She saw a man on the floor. That was enough. And maybe that is the part of the story worth carrying with us. Not the envelope, not the money, not the downfall of a cruel manager, satisfying as justice may be. The heart of the story is the moment before reward exists, before witnesses understand, before the world claps, before anyone promises that goodness will be repaid. It is the moment when helping costs something. Naomi lost her job in that moment. She spent the last of her money in that moment. She was humiliated in that moment, but she kept something Kendra could never steal, even with false statements and forged records. She kept the kind of dignity that does not depend on a title. She kept the kind of courage that survives poverty, grief, and exhaustion. She kept the part of herself that still believed a stranger's life was worth bending down for. Kendra, in the end, lost everything she had tried to protect by refusing to bend. She protected the restaurant's image and destroyed her own. She guarded the cash drawer and exposed her theft. She treated compassion as weakness and discovered too late that compassion had witnesses stronger than fear. That is how justice sometimes works. Not always quickly, not always loudly, but with a patience that follows every hidden thing to its door. So the next time you see someone fall, maybe not on a restaurant floor, maybe not in a way anyone else can see, remember Naomi Reed. Remember the room that stepped back. Remember the woman who knelt. Remember that a person does not become worthy of kindness because they are secretly rich, secretly connected, or secretly important. They are worthy because they are human. And if you believe the world still needs people who choose mercy when no one is clapping, carry that belief into the next ordinary moment. Because somewhere, in a diner, on a bus, in a hospital hallway, under a leaking roof, someone is waiting to find out whether the room will turn away or whether one person will remember what humanity is supposed to look like. Flight 718 entered the storm.
Captain's down! I need help!
Lightning tore across the cabin.
Everyone stay seated.
Then the captain collapsed.
Captain, stay with me.
All 186 lives held still.
Can anyone here fly this aircraft?
From seat 34B, Maya stood.
I can help.
She had no uniform or badge, only an old leather bag and a name the airline feared.
He said she could not fly.
She was fired for a reason.
3 years earlier, Maya wore captain stripes.
Sign the report, then walk away.
It started with one missing number.
The records don't match.
But to understand why Graham Voss was more afraid of Maya Reed than of the storm outside, we have to go back 3 years. To the morning she first noticed a single missing number in an aircraft maintenance record. At the time, Maya still wore the Aurora Skies uniform with pride. She had earned every stripe on it the difficult way. There had been no family money paying for flight hours, no powerful relatives opening doors, and no easy path from the neighborhood where she grew up to the left seat of a commercial aircraft. Her father, Daniel Reed, had spent most of his life working beneath airplanes rather than inside them. He was an avionics technician, one of those men passengers never saw, but depended on every time a plane rose above the clouds. Daniel had taught Maya that aircraft did not become dangerous all at once. A disaster rarely began with fire, smoke, or a screaming alarm. More often, it began with one small shortcut that nobody wanted to question. A number entered incorrectly. A warning cleared too quickly. A part marked as replaced when it had only been reset. A supervisor deciding that a delay would cost more than a risk. When Maya was a little girl, she used to sit beside him in the garage while he repaired radios, test panels, and old electrical equipment from the hangar. He would place a wiring diagram in front of her and explain that every line had a purpose. Even the smallest connection mattered, because machines did not care whether people were tired, impatient, rich, or powerful. A system either worked properly or it did not. Those lessons stayed with Maya long after she became a pilot. She was never the loudest captain at Aurora Skies. She did not enjoy drawing attention to herself. She did not try to impress crews by acting fearless. What made her respected was the fact that she prepared more carefully than anyone expected. She studied weather patterns before every flight. She read maintenance notes instead of skipping past them. She listened to ground crews. She checked again when something did not make sense. That habit had saved passengers from minor trouble more than once. A faulty cargo warning, an incorrect fuel figure, a hydraulic message that turned out to be nothing serious. Most people in the company saw those delays as inconveniences. Maya saw them as proof that carefulness was not paranoia. Then came Flight 216 from Dallas to Phoenix. It was an ordinary overnight route. The passengers were tired. The cabin crew wanted an on-time departure. The weather was clear, and the aircraft had already been delayed once because of a late inbound connection. It should have been a simple flight, the kind people forgot the moment they landed. But while reviewing the maintenance log, Maya noticed that an electrical distribution unit had been marked as replaced during the previous week. The entry looked complete at first glance. The date was there. The technician's name was there. The maintenance release was signed. Only one thing was missing: the serial number of the replacement unit. For most people, it would have meant nothing. A missing number in a long page of technical records could easily be a clerical mistake. But Maya knew that components like that were tracked for a reason. A part's serial number told the company where it came from, how old it was, what service history it carried, and whether it had been connected to previous incidents. She asked the ground maintenance team to verify the record. The technician checked the paperwork, then checked again. He looked uncomfortable. He told Maya the part had been inspected and the aircraft was safe to fly. Maya did not accuse him of lying. She did not raise her voice. She simply asked to see the replacement documentation. It was not available. She asked for the maintenance supervisor. The supervisor arrived irritated, already aware that passengers were waiting at the gate. He explained that the component had been dealt with, that the issue was minor, and that the aircraft had completed several flights since then without any problems. Maya understood the pressure. Every minute on the ground cost the airline money. Every delay created complaints. Every cancellation turned into a report that climbed upward through management. But an aircraft was not safer because it had been lucky. She refused to sign the release until the records were verified. The flight was delayed. Passengers complained. Gate agents apologized. The company's operations center called repeatedly. By the time the documents finally arrived, the problem had been explained away as a simple database error. The part had supposedly been replaced correctly, and the missing number had supposedly been omitted during a system transfer. Maya allowed the flight to continue only after the aircraft passed a more detailed inspection. It landed safely in Phoenix. But Maya could not forget the feeling she had when she looked at that incomplete record. Over the next several months, she started noticing similar inconsistencies across Aurora Skies' older fleet. A repeated electrical warning that disappeared after a reset. A maintenance sign-off completed at a time when the technician had been assigned to another airport. Components marked as replaced without a matching inventory transfer. Aircraft that seemed to suffer the same minor problems again and again, but never long enough to trigger a formal grounding. At first, Maya believed the airline had a paperwork problem. Then she began to suspect that it had a safety problem. The more she looked, the more patterns appeared. The aircraft involved were not random. Many belonged to the same group of older planes that had been modified during a cost-cutting program. Several had used components supplied by a contractor called Horizon Avionics Solutions. The company had been praised publicly for helping Aurora Skies reduce maintenance expenses and improve turnaround time. But Daniel Reed had once warned Maya about companies that made their profits by promising that expensive problems could disappear cheaply. He had told her that the cheapest part was often the most expensive one in the long run. Maya compiled everything she found into a formal safety report. She was careful. She did not write with anger. She did not make accusations she could not prove. She listed the aircraft numbers, the dates, the recurring warnings, the incomplete records, and the supplier details. Then she requested an independent audit. For 2 weeks, no one responded. At first, she assumed the report had been lost in the system. Then she received an invitation to a private meeting with Aurora Skies management. That was where she met Graham Voss for the first time. Back then, Voss was not yet the chief executive officer. He was the airline's chief operations strategist, a title that sounded technical enough to be trusted and vague enough to hide the power behind it. He was known for saving money without appearing cruel. He had a talent for making difficult decisions sound reasonable. Investors liked him because profits rose wherever he went. Executives liked him because he never created public scandals. Employees feared him because people who crossed him often found themselves quietly removed from the path ahead. Maya entered the meeting room believing someone had finally taken her concerns seriously. Voss greeted her warmly. He praised her flight record. He spoke about her discipline, her professionalism, and the fact that Aurora Skies needed pilots who cared deeply about safety. Then the tone shifted. He suggested that Maya had become too emotionally invested in technical details outside her direct area of responsibility. He explained that maintenance teams had already reviewed the issue. He reminded her that pilots and engineers needed to trust one another. He implied that her persistence was creating tension inside the company. Nothing he said sounded openly threatening. That was what made it dangerous. By the end of the meeting, Maya realized that Voss was not trying to understand her report. He was trying to make her doubt it. He wanted her to believe that asking questions had made her difficult. He wanted her to believe that being careful had made her disruptive. He wanted her to feel ashamed for caring more about the truth than the company's image. Maya left the meeting unsettled, but she did not withdraw the report. Instead, she filed a second one. That was when Aurora Skies stopped treating her as an employee and began treating her as a problem. Within weeks, Maya was removed from active flight duty pending an internal review. No one explained what the review involved. No one gave her a clear timeline. She was asked to attend meetings where people spoke around the issue without ever addressing it directly. Her supervisors became distant. Colleagues who once trusted her stopped returning messages. Then the rumors began. Anonymous sources told aviation websites that a captain at Aurora Skies had repeatedly caused delays by overreacting to minor maintenance concerns. Industry forums began discussing an unnamed pilot who had supposedly clashed with ground crews. A columnist wrote about the danger of allowing personal anxiety to influence professional judgment. Maya's name was not mentioned at first. It did not need to be. Inside the airline, everyone knew who the story was about. Months later, when Aurora Skies finally released its decision, the company did not accuse Maya of misconduct. They did not claim she had broken any regulation. They did not say she was unqualified. They used softer words. They stated that her employment had ended because of concerns about professional collaboration and operational judgment. It was enough. Her licenses remained valid. Her training record remained strong. But no major airline wanted to hire a pilot whose former company had quietly labeled her a risk. Maya appealed. She requested access to the maintenance records that had prompted her report. She contacted regulators. She spoke to lawyers. But every path seemed to lead back to the same invisible wall. The airline insisted that its fleet was safe. The records she requested were delayed, restricted, or declared confidential. Her report was marked as unsubstantiated. The company moved on, and so did everyone else, except Maya. She did not stop believing that something was wrong. She simply ran out of people willing to listen. The hardest part was not losing the uniform. It was losing the future she had spent her entire life building. For years, she had imagined the first day she would become a captain. She had imagined the weight of the jacket on her shoulders, the sound of her name spoken over the cabin speakers, and the quiet pride on her father's face when he saw her standing beside an aircraft. Daniel Reed had lived long enough to see her earn that title, but he did not live long enough to see what Aurora Skies did to her. He had died a year before Maya filed the report, leaving behind a small metal case filled with old notes, component numbers, supplier records, and handwritten observations from his own years in aviation. At the time, Maya had thought of it only as a piece of him she could not bear to throw away. She carried that case everywhere, not because she believed it contained the answer to anything, but because it reminded her that someone had once taught her not to look away when the truth became inconvenient. After Aurora Skies pushed her out, Maya took whatever work she could find. She taught emergency procedures at a simulator center outside the city. She trained student pilots who dreamed of flying for airlines one day. She showed them how to handle engine failures, severe weather, rapid descents, and instrument malfunctions. At night, after the students went home, Maya sometimes stayed behind. She would sit alone in the simulator, surrounded by artificial screens and plastic controls, looking at a runway that was not real and listening to a wind that did not exist. She still knew every procedure. She still remembered every call-out. She still dreamed about flying. But she no longer believed the industry would ever allow her back into a real cockpit. That was why she had booked the cheapest seat she could find on Aurora Sky's Flight 718. She was traveling to an interview for a small training position in another state. The job did not offer prestige. It did not offer a captain's salary. It did not even guarantee that she would ever fly a real aircraft again. But it offered something she had almost stopped expecting: a reason to stay close to the sky. She had boarded the flight quietly, kept her head down, and chosen seat 34B near the back. She had no idea Graham Voss would be sitting in first class. She had no idea Captain Luis Herrera would collapse. She had no idea that the aircraft would enter a storm, carrying the exact kind of danger she had tried to expose. But when the cabin lights flickered and the first warning chime sounded, Maya felt something old awaken inside her. Not panic. Recognition. The sound was wrong. The pattern was wrong. And when Nora Bell asked if anyone on board knew how to fly, Maya had understood that remaining silent would be the same as helping the lie survive. So she stood. Now, as Nora guided her toward the cockpit, Maya could feel the eyes of the passengers following her. Some looked hopeful. Some looked afraid. A few looked at her with the same suspicion Graham Voss had planted in the cabin only moments earlier. But Maya did not look back. She had spent 3 years trying to prove that she belonged in the sky. This time, she did not need anyone's permission. The cockpit door opened. The air inside was cold and sharp. Rain hammered against the windshield. Captain Herrera lay unconscious in the left seat, while 2 passengers with medical training worked beside him. Evan Cole, the first officer, was gripping the controls with both hands, trying to manage the aircraft, the weather, the warning systems, and his own fear all at once. Maya stepped forward. Then she looked at the maintenance display. For 1 second, everything inside her went still. The aircraft registration number glowing on the screen was one she knew. It belonged to one of the exact planes listed in the report Aurora Skies had buried 3 years earlier. And suddenly, Maya understood that the storm was not the only thing trying to bring Flight 718 down. The moment the cockpit door closed behind Maya Reed, the storm stopped being something she could watch from a passenger window. It became a living force that pressed against every surface around her. Rain struck the windshield in violent sheets. Lightning turned the cockpit white for half a second at a time. Warning tones rose and disappeared beneath the growl of the engines, while the aircraft shuddered through air that no longer felt stable. Captain Luis Herrera sat motionless in the left seat, his eyes closed, his body held in place by the harness. He had collapsed only minutes earlier, leaving Evan Cole, the young first officer, alone with a medical emergency, severe weather, and a panel of instruments that seemed to be losing faith in themselves one screen at a time. Evan did not look like the kind of pilot who had ever imagined failure. He was trained, polished, and careful. He had spent years learning procedures, memorizing limitations, and proving that he belonged in the right seat of a commercial jet. But training had a way of becoming something very different. When the cockpit was dark, the captain was unconscious, and 186 lives were sitting behind a locked door. Maya understood that fear. She had known it long before Aurora Skies had taken her uniform, her cockpit, and the career she had once believed would define her life. Fear was not always loud. Sometimes it sat quietly in the room, hiding behind a steady voice and a professional posture, waiting for one small failure to become another. She did not begin by trying to take control of everything. That would have been useless. Evan was still flying the aircraft. The engines were still running. The airplane still had a path through the storm, even if that path was narrowing by the second. What Evan needed was not someone to make him feel smaller. He needed someone who could separate the emergency into pieces small enough to survive. Maya told him to stay with the essentials: airspeed, altitude, direction. Nothing else mattered until those things were secure. The rest of the cockpit could flash, chime, and threaten all it wanted. Panic would come from trying to solve every problem at once. Survival would come from handling the next problem first. For a few seconds, Evan's breathing slowed. His hands remained tight around the controls, but they stopped moving with the helpless urgency of someone searching for a miracle. Maya watched him settle into the rhythm of the work. He was still frightened. He was still young, but he was listening. Outside the cockpit, Nora Bell moved through the cabin with the kind of calm that could only come from someone who understood how much people needed to borrow courage from another person. She did not promise the passengers that everything would be fine. Promises were dangerous at 37,000 feet. Instead, she gave them instructions, routines, and the steady presence of someone who refused to let fear become contagious. Most of the passengers did not know exactly what had happened. They only knew that the captain had stopped speaking. The lights had flickered, and the storm outside looked less like weather and more like a wall. Some held hands with strangers. Some stared at the ceiling as if the aircraft might answer their questions. Some prayed in silence. And in first class, Graham Voss sat surrounded by comfort that suddenly meant nothing. Voss had spent his life believing that every crisis could be controlled by the right person in the right room. He knew how to make nervous investors feel confident. He knew how to turn bad press into reassuring language. He knew how to bury a problem beneath legal statements and polished smiles. But the cockpit of Flight 718 was not a boardroom. It did not care who owned the company, who had influence, or who could afford the best attorneys. The storm did not recognize titles, and for the first time in years, Graham Voss was trapped in a place where the woman he had tried to erase was more valuable than he was. Maya studied the flickering displays, while Evan followed the emergency procedures. A navigation screen went dark, returned, then began showing incomplete information. One electrical warning appeared and disappeared. Another followed. The failures were not dramatic enough to look like a total collapse, but they were too strange to ignore. They came in bursts, almost as if the aircraft were trying to tell them something and could not decide whether it had the strength to keep speaking. Then Maya saw the aircraft registration number on a small maintenance screen. For one moment, the storm disappeared from her mind. She knew that aircraft, not because she had flown it often, but because she had seen its records before. 3 years earlier, when she had still worn Aurora Skies captain stripes, she had found a missing number in a maintenance report tied to an electrical replacement. At the time, it had looked like a small inconsistency, a missing serial number, a skipped verification line, a document that seemed to have been cleaned too carefully. But Maya had learned from her father that the smallest missing detail could carry the largest warning. Daniel Reed had worked around aircraft systems for most of his life. He was not famous. He did not have a high-ranking office or a seat in executive meetings. He was simply the kind of technician who noticed what other people ignored. He noticed when parts were listed as new, but carried the wear of older units. He noticed when records were signed too quickly. He noticed when aircraft behaved differently after rain, after heavy electrical demand, or after long hours in difficult weather. He had never believed that danger announced itself loudly. Most danger, he used to say, began as something people found convenient to overlook. Maya had carried that lesson with her into every cockpit she had ever entered. And now, as she watched the displays flicker on Flight 718, she understood something that made her chest tighten. The storm had not created the problem. The storm had forced it into the open. She asked Nora to bring the worn leather bag from her seat in row 34B. Nora did not ask why. She had seen enough in Maya's face to understand that this was not a request made out of fear. It was a request made because Maya had found a thread, and she intended to follow it. While Nora made her way through the cabin, Evan reported the aircraft status to air traffic control. He declared the medical emergency. He reported the electrical failures. He requested priority handling. His voice was still strained, but it had changed. It no longer sounded like someone waiting to be rescued. It sounded like someone beginning to believe he might be able to help rescue others. Then Aurora Sky's operations called the cockpit. At first, the voice on the radio sounded controlled and professional. The operations representative asked about the captain's condition, the instrument failures, and the aircraft's ability to continue. But then came a question that did not belong in an emergency call. They asked whether Maya Reed was in the cockpit. For a moment, the storm seemed quieter. Evan looked toward Maya. Nora, who had returned with the leather bag, stood near the cockpit door and understood immediately that the company had not learned Maya's name by accident. Graham Voss had already made his calls. He had already started trying to shape the story before the aircraft had even touched the ground. Maya had once been afraid of what her name could do to her. She had watched it become a warning whispered in airline offices. She had watched former colleagues avoid her because defending her might make them inconvenient too. She had watched her career become a rumor that other people used to protect themselves. But the storm had stripped away every reason to be afraid. She told operations the truth. She was a former Aurora Skies captain with experience on that aircraft type. She was assisting the first officer during an active medical emergency. The aircraft needed priority. The crew needed a safe runway. Nothing else mattered. The operations representative suggested a diversion to a larger company-controlled airport farther away, where Aurora Skies could send its own staff and manage the emergency privately. It sounded reasonable to anyone who did not understand what the aircraft was telling them. But Maya understood. A farther airport meant more time inside the storm. More time meant more moisture, more electrical demand, more chances for the unstable system to fail again. And a company-controlled airport would give Graham Voss more time to gather people, shape records, and decide which version of the truth the world would hear first. Maya did not argue emotionally. She did not mention Voss. She did not make accusations over an open radio frequency. She simply explained the facts to Evan, and Evan made the decision that mattered. Graybridge Field was closer. Graybridge Field had a runway long enough for the aircraft if the approach remained stable. Graybridge Field had emergency crews ready, and Graybridge Field was the safest option they had. The controller confirmed the diversion. That was the moment Graham Voss began to lose control. Behind the cockpit door, he could still make phone calls. He could still speak to company lawyers and senior executives. He could still try to convince himself that the situation could be contained. But every minute, Flight 718 moved toward Graybridge Field. The possibility of containment became smaller. If the aircraft landed safely, investigators would examine it. If investigators examined it, they would find the electrical components. If they found the components, they would find the maintenance records. And if they found the records, they might discover why Maya Reed had been forced out 3 years earlier. Nora returned to the cabin after bringing Maya's bag forward. She moved from row to row with a steadiness that kept the passengers from seeing how serious the situation had become. A young mother held her daughter close. An elderly man kept his eyes shut and whispered words only he could hear. A boy with a small toy airplane no longer asked his mother whether they would be all right. He simply gripped the toy in both hands and stared at the darkness beyond the window. Near the front of the cabin, one passenger stood despite the seatbelt sign and demanded answers. He wanted to know why the captain was not speaking. He wanted to know why a woman with a controversial past had been allowed into the cockpit. He spoke loudly because fear often tries to disguise itself as anger. Nora did not give him the story he wanted. She told him that the crew was handling an emergency and that everyone on board needed to remain seated. When he continued to protest, the aircraft dropped hard through a pocket of turbulence. His balance disappeared before his argument did. He grabbed the top of a seat and realized in one sudden and humiliating instant that there were no important passengers on that airplane. There were only people who needed the crew to bring them home. He sat down. In the cockpit, Maya opened the old metal case from her bag. Inside were the notes her father had kept for years. Some were stained from workshops and rain. Some were folded at the corners. Some carried diagrams that only someone trained to recognize patterns would understand. Daniel Reed had never expected those pages to become evidence. He had written them because he believed that knowledge had a duty. If something dangerous was happening, someone had to leave a record of it. Maya found the page she was looking for. It described a family of electrical units that could behave unpredictably under extreme moisture and fluctuating demand. The failures could begin quietly. A display could reset. A warning could blink and disappear. A circuit could recover just long enough for someone to decide there was no real problem. But under pressure, the instability could spread. Maya looked from the notebook to the failing display. The patterns matched. It was not proof of every detail. Not yet. But it was enough to understand the immediate danger. The aircraft still had reliable primary data. The engines were stable. The flight controls were responding. But the electronic systems could no longer be trusted completely. And the longer they stayed inside the storm, the more dangerous that uncertainty became. She explained what she believed to Evan without overwhelming him. The goal was not to solve 3 years of corruption in the middle of a storm. The goal was to land the airplane before the next failure took away something they could not afford to lose. Evan listened. Then he did something Maya would remember long after the flight was over. He stopped trying to prove that he was in control. Instead, he accepted help. That was the difference between arrogance and courage. Arrogance demanded that a person face danger alone, so no one could see them afraid. Courage understood that survival sometimes required trusting the person beside you. The descent toward Graybridge Field began. The aircraft entered lower cloud, where the rain felt heavier and the turbulence sharper. Every few seconds, lightning exposed the wings before returning them to darkness. The runway lights appeared once through the weather, then vanished again. The cockpit was no longer full of alarms, but the silence between the warnings felt worse. Air traffic control reported worsening wind conditions. Rainwater had begun pooling along parts of the runway. Several aircraft had already diverted. Emergency vehicles were waiting near the landing area, their lights reflecting through the storm like distant signals from another world. Maya studied the approach information. The conditions were difficult, but not impossible. That distinction mattered. They did not have a normal landing ahead of them. They had an exhausted first officer, a captain who could not help, unreliable displays, a severe crosswind, and a system defect that seemed to be spreading through the aircraft in slow, deliberate waves. But they also had a runway. They had engines. They had enough instruments. And they had time if they did not waste it. Maya told Evan they would need to prepare for a manual approach. The automated systems had done enough to bring them close, but the final moments would depend on human judgment. Evan hesitated, not because he did not understand, but because he understood exactly how much was being asked of him. Maya did not tell him to be fearless. She reminded him that fear was not the enemy. Losing focus was. He had the aircraft beneath his hands. He had the runway ahead. He had the training he had spent years earning. And he had someone beside him who knew what it felt like to carry a room full of strangers through the worst moment of their lives. Evan nodded. The clouds thinned for a few seconds. Below them, Graybridge Field appeared. The runway lights glowed through the rain, narrow and distant, surrounded by darkness. For one brief moment, everyone in the cockpit could see where they needed to go. Then a powerful gust hit the aircraft from the side. The plane rolled sharply. A warning tone sounded. The remaining navigation display flickered again. Evan's breath caught. The runway vanished behind rain. And somewhere in the cabin, 186 people realized that the most dangerous part of the flight had only just begun. For a few seconds, there was no runway. There was only rain. There was only wind. There was only the violent sound of an aircraft being pushed sideways through the dark by forces no human being could control. Evan tightened his grip on the controls, but Maya could see the moment when fear tried to take over again. It was there in the way his eyes moved too quickly from one instrument to another. It was there in the breath he did not finish. It was there in the silence that came just before someone either found their training or lost it. Maya stayed with him. She did not take the airplane from his hands. She did not try to become the hero of the story by doing everything herself. Evan was the pilot flying, and the only way they would survive was if he remained connected to the aircraft instead of surrendering to panic. So Maya gave him one instruction at a time. She kept his attention on the remaining instruments. She helped him trust the physical feel of the aircraft when the screens could not be trusted. She reminded him that a crosswind did not need to be defeated. It needed to be understood. The plane would move. The storm would push. Their job was not to force the sky into obedience. Their job was to make the next correct decision before the next dangerous second arrived. Behind them, Nora kept the cabin from falling apart. The passengers could feel the descent. They could feel the aircraft being thrown from side to side. They heard the engines change as Evan adjusted power. They heard the storm strike the fuselage like heavy stones. Some people cried. Some people held the hands of strangers. Some stared at the seatbacks in front of them because looking out the window felt impossible. Nora moved through that fear with the quiet strength of someone who understood that people did not always need answers. Sometimes they needed a face that told them they had not been abandoned. She checked seatbelts. She helped a frightened child hold on to a parent's hand. She guided an elderly passenger through slow breaths. And when panic rose near the front of the cabin, she did not allow it to become a fire that spread through the rows. Even Graham Voss had gone quiet. The man who had tried to stop Maya from reaching the cockpit could no longer pretend that he was protecting anyone. Every new movement of the aircraft reminded him that the woman he had tried to destroy was now helping save his life. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that the truth was not dangerous because it embarrassed him. The truth was dangerous because it had consequences. The runway lights appeared again. This time, they did not vanish immediately. They were still distant, still blurred by rain, still narrow enough to make the approach feel unforgiving. But they were there. Evan saw them. Maya saw them. And in that moment, the cockpit changed. Not because the danger had passed, but because uncertainty had become a direction. The aircraft continued downward. Wind struck again, harder than before. The nose shifted. The wings dipped. The wet runway moved across the windshield, then disappeared at the edge of Maya's vision. Evan corrected too sharply at first, then steadied himself when Maya reminded him to make smaller movements. The storm wanted panic. It wanted a desperate reaction. But Maya had learned long ago that the most dangerous mistakes were usually born from trying to fix everything too fast. The plane crossed the threshold. For one endless second, it seemed as though the runway would remain just out of reach. Then the wheels touched down. The landing was hard. The aircraft hit the wet pavement with enough force to throw the cabin forward against its seatbelts. Water erupted from beneath the tires. Reverse thrust filled the night with a roar. The runway lights streaked past the windows as Evan held the aircraft straight through the wind. No one cheered immediately. The people in the cabin were too afraid to trust what they had felt. They waited. They waited for the engines to quiet. They waited for the violent shaking to stop. They waited for the aircraft to slow enough for their bodies to believe what their minds could not yet accept. Then Flight 718 came to a stop. For several seconds, there was only rain tapping against the fuselage and the broken sound of people trying to breathe again. Then someone began to cry. Someone else began to clap. The applause spread slowly. Not as celebration at first, but as release. People held one another. Parents pressed their faces into their children's hair. Strangers, who had never spoken before, reached across the aisle and touched each other's hands. They had gone into the storm as passengers, but they came through it as witnesses to the same impossible night. In the cockpit, Evan leaned back from the controls with the stunned expression of a man who had just discovered how close he had come to losing everything. He had not flown perfectly. No one could have in those conditions. But he had stayed present. He had listened. He had learned that courage was not a performance. It was a decision made over and over again when every part of you wanted to give up. Maya sat beside him, exhausted, but still. She did not raise her arms. She did not ask for recognition. She looked through the rain-streaked windshield toward the emergency lights waiting on the runway. And for the first time in 3 years, she allowed herself to feel something she had tried not to need. She felt seen, not by executives, not by reporters, not by the company that had taken everything from her. She felt seen by the truth itself. Captain Luis Herrera was taken from the cockpit after the aircraft had stopped and received urgent medical care. He survived. The medical crisis had been serious, but it was not the end of his story. Later, after he learned what had happened, he would understand that the people he had trusted behind him had carried his passengers through the one moment when he could not. But the night was not over. The moment the wheels touched the ground, Flight 718 stopped being only an emergency landing. It became evidence. Investigators entered the cockpit before the storm had fully moved away from Graybridge Field. They secured the flight data. They documented the electrical warnings. They examined the maintenance history. They took custody of the component information. And when Maya placed her father's metal case on the table in the airport interview room, the old notes that had once seemed like the private worry of an ignored technician became part of a much larger question. Why had the aircraft failed the way it had? Why did its maintenance records contain gaps? Why had Maya Reed been removed from Aurora skies after raising similar concerns 3 years earlier? And why had Graham Voss seemed so terrified the moment he learned she was in the cockpit? Voss tried to regain control the way he always had. He made calls. He asked for lawyers. He attempted to frame the situation as an unfortunate combination of weather, a medical emergency, and an employee with a personal grievance against the airline. He wanted investigators to see Maya as a former captain who had returned to the cockpit carrying old resentment. But that story collapsed as soon as the evidence began to speak. The flight data recorder showed the sequence of electrical failures. The maintenance records revealed repeated component changes that did not match the parts supposedly installed. The missing number Maya had noticed years earlier turned out not to be a harmless clerical error. It had broken the chain of identification for a series of units that should never have returned to active aircraft service. Components had been listed as new when they had been rebuilt, relabeled, and moved through a supplier called Horizon Avionics Solutions. At first, Horizon appeared to be only another vendor in a complicated aviation supply chain. Then investigators followed the money. They found payments routed through companies that existed mostly on paper. They found contracts approved through layers of signatures designed to make responsibility difficult to trace. They found maintenance supervisors who had been pressured to sign forms they did not fully understand. They found workers who had been told that raising questions would cost them their jobs. And eventually, they found the financial links that connected Horizon Avionics Solutions to a network of shell companies controlled by people loyal to Graham Voss. The same man who had called Maya unstable had profited from the weakness she had tried to expose. The same man who had treated safety reports as obstacles had built a system that rewarded silence. The same man who had tried to stop Maya from reaching the cockpit had known exactly why she could not be allowed to speak. Once the truth began moving, it moved faster than Voss could contain. Former mechanics came forward. Record specialists came forward. A retired quality control manager produced copies of internal emails that had been saved in private because he had never trusted the company to keep them. A supervisor admitted that some replacement units had been approved under pressure, even when the documentation was incomplete. Another employee revealed that Maya's report had not been dismissed because it lacked evidence. It had been dismissed because it had too much. And every new witness made the old story harder to believe. Maya was called to testify before an aviation oversight panel weeks later. She arrived wearing no captain's uniform. She did not need one. The uniform had never been the source of her authority. Her authority came from the fact that she had seen danger, spoken about it, and refused to become silent when silence was easier. She did not turn the hearing into revenge. She did not raise her voice. She explained what she had found 3 years earlier. She explained why the missing number mattered. She explained how maintenance records were supposed to protect passengers, not protect executives. She explained that safety was not a slogan painted on a corporate wall. It was a series of decisions made by ordinary people who either chose to tell the truth or chose to look away. Then she opened her father's metal case. Inside were the notes Daniel Reed had written, before anyone believed they would matter. He had spent his life trying to make aircraft safer. He had never asked for a title. He had never asked to be remembered. He had only believed that someone had to leave a record when something did not feel right. For years, that record had been ignored. Now it sat before the people who had the power to act. Graham Voss watched from across the hearing room as the story he had spent years controlling came apart piece by piece. The reports he had buried returned as evidence. The maintenance signatures he had trusted became questions. The missing number he had believed no one would notice became the thread that pulled the entire deception apart. His downfall was not dramatic because he shouted or confessed in front of cameras. It was dramatic because he had built his power on the belief that no one would ever make him answer for what he had done. And now, one by one, people were asking. The board removed him from his position. Federal investigators opened criminal cases connected to fraud, falsified maintenance records, and the financial network behind Horizon Avionics Solutions. Months later, Graham Voss was taken into custody, while the same news cameras he had once tried to manage waited outside. There was a certain justice in the way it happened. Voss had spent years using paperwork to hide danger. In the end, paperwork exposed him. He had silenced people by making them feel small. In the end, the people he had ignored became the witnesses who brought him down. He had treated Maya Reed's name like a problem to be erased. In the end, her name became impossible to separate from the truth. Aurora Skies offered Maya an apology. It came with compensation, public statements, and an invitation to return. They offered her a senior position. They offered to restore the career they had helped destroy. They spoke about rebuilding trust and creating a safer culture. For many people, that offer would have seemed like victory. But Maya understood something they did not. Some doors were not meant to be reopened. She accepted the apology because acknowledgement mattered. She accepted the compensation because justice did not require her to pretend that harm had never been done. But she did not return to Aurora Skies. Instead, Maya used part of what she received to build something that did not depend on anyone powerful deciding who deserved to be heard. She created the Daniel Reed Aviation Fellowship. It began in a modest simulator training center near a small airport, where young people from neighborhoods that had never seen aviation as an option could learn about aircraft systems, emergency procedures, maintenance ethics, and the responsibility that came with stepping into a cockpit. Maya did not teach them that pilots were heroes. She taught them that pilots were human. She taught them that fear was normal, but silence could be dangerous. She taught them that a checklist was not just a list of tasks. It was a promise to everyone who trusted you with their life. She taught them that when something felt wrong, they had the right to ask questions. And perhaps most importantly, she taught them that no title, no paycheck, and no powerful person was worth more than the truth. Evan Cole visited the center months after Flight 718. The storm had changed him too. He had returned to flying after additional training, but he no longer confused confidence with control. He understood that asking for help had not made him weak. It had helped save 186 people. Nora Bell came too. She stood quietly near the simulator room and watched Maya guide a nervous student through an emergency procedure. Nora had seen Maya at her lowest point, standing in a cabin aisle while a powerful man tried to stop her from doing the right thing. Now she saw what had come from that moment. Not revenge, not bitterness, purpose. Captain Luis Herrera eventually recovered and wrote Maya a letter. He did not write it as an airline captain to a former captain. He wrote it as one human being to another. He thanked her for protecting the passengers he had been unable to protect himself. He thanked her for believing in Evan when Evan had begun to doubt himself. And he thanked her for proving that a person's worth could not be decided by the people who had once tried to take everything from them. Years later, passengers still remembered Flight 718. Some remembered the storm. Some remembered the hard landing. Some remembered the woman in the ordinary coat who stood up from seat 34B when everyone else was too frightened to move. But Maya remembered something else. She remembered her father's old notes. She remembered the missing number. She remembered the years when people told her that speaking up would only make things worse. And she remembered the truth that finally carried her through the storm. The sky had never judged her by her past. It had never cared whether she wore a captain's uniform, whether an executive approved of her, or whether a company tried to erase her name. The sky only asked one thing. When people trusted her with their lives, would she respect the truth? Maya Reed did. And because she did, 186 people came home. Because she did, a man who believed he was untouchable finally had to answer for what he had done. And because she did, a new generation of future pilots, mechanics, and engineers learned that courage was not always loud. Sometimes courage was a missing number in a maintenance record. Sometimes it was an old notebook nobody wanted to read. Sometimes it was a woman standing up in seat 34B, even when the most powerful man on the plane wanted her to sit back down. The truth may take time. It may be ignored. It may be buried beneath fear, money, and silence. But when the storm comes, the truth is often the only thing strong enough to guide people home. If this story reminds you that doing the right thing matters, even when no one stands beside you, hold on to that lesson. Because the world does not become safer when brave people stay quiet. It becomes safer when they speak.